Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. When the call came in from dispatch, the clock read 2:47. I'm Jonathan Pierce, and I've been working the night shift on the east side of town for nearly 6 months. It was a cold Tuesday in November, and it had been raining steadily for 2 hours. The lights reflecting off the sign of a store that was still open despite the hours stretched across the asphalt, blurred by the rain. Kayla Ramirez was on dispatch that night. She had this way of keeping her voice perfectly level no matter what was coming through the radio, which always helped during the weird calls. Unit 7. We've got a vehicle check needed at the old Clean Wave car wash on Riverside. Caller reports a sedan's been sitting there for 3 hours. Lights on, driver door open. The Clean Wave had been closed for 2 years after the owner died. The property sat there deteriorating, its massive sign dark except for one letter that still flickered occasionally, casting everything in an unsettling strobe effect. Kids sometimes use the parking lot for whatever kids do when they think nobody's watching. But on a rainy Tuesday night it should have been deserted. I pulled into the lot, my headlights sweeping across the sedan. Silver Toyota Camry, maybe 2015 model, exactly as described. The driver door was indeed open, dome light on, rain pooling on the driver's seat. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass, just an abandoned car getting soaked from the inside out. The keys were still in the ignition, engine off. A brown leather jacket lay across the passenger seat, and when I checked the pockets with my gloved hands, I found a receipt from a hardware store time-stamped at 11:15 p.m. that night. The items purchased made me pause. Zip ties, duct tape, a tarp, and industrial bleach. The receipt had an address written on the back in shaky handwriting, like someone had scrawled it while driving or in a hurry. It was for a storage facility about 4 blocks away, Unit 47B. I radioed Kayla to run the plates while I checked the rest of the vehicle. The registration came back to a Logan Whitfield. 34 years old, no priors, lived across town in a decent neighborhood. His driver's license photo showed a clean-cut guy with a nervous smile, the kind who probably worked in an office somewhere downtown. The trunk was locked, but through the back seat I could smell something chemical, sharp, and medical. Not quite bleach, but something in that family. There were dark stains on the trunk's carpet, visible through the fold-down seat opening, still wet and spreading. I made the decision to check that storage facility. Protocol said to wait for backup on something like this, but backup meant pulling someone off another call on a night when we were already stretched thin. The storage place was close enough that I figured I'd do a quick drive-by, see if anything looked obviously wrong, then make the call about backup from there. The facility was one of those 24-hour access places with keypad entry and minimal lighting. Through the chain-link fence, I could see rows of orange doors stretching back into darkness. The main gate was propped open with a brick, which immediately set off warning bells in my head. These places lived and died by their security. Nobody left gates open. I parked outside and called it in to Kayla, telling her I was going to do a perimeter check. She reminded me about backup being available, but I could hear other calls coming through in the background. Tuesday night might have been slow by weekend standards, but the rain always brought out the accidents and domestics. Walking through that gate felt like crossing into another world. The security lights created pools of harsh white surrounded by deep shadows. The rain hammered on the metal roofs, creating this constant drumming that masked other sounds. Unit 47B was in the back row, and as I approached, I could see its door was rolled up about 2 feet. Light spilled out from underneath, flickering like someone was moving around inside. I drew my service weapon but kept it low, approaching from an angle that would give me cover behind the adjacent unit if needed. That's when I heard the voices. Multiple people, at least 3, talking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out words over the rain, but the cadence was wrong. Too fast, too panicked for a normal late-night storage run. I keyed my radio for backup, giving Kayla the exact location and situation. She confirmed units were rolling, ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes feels like a lifetime when you're standing in the rain, watching shadows move behind a partially open storage door, knowing something's wrong but not knowing what. I should have waited. That's what training said, what common sense said. But then I heard what was unmistakably a scream, muffled but undeniable, coming from inside that unit. The sound cut through the rain like a knife, and suddenly 12 minutes might as well have been 12 hours. I announced myself loudly, "Police! Come out with your hands visible." The talking inside stopped immediately. The light went out. For a moment, there was just the sound of rain on metal, my own breathing, and somewhere in the distance, sirens that seemed to be getting no closer. The door started rolling up slowly, manually, the metal grinding against its tracks. I had good cover behind a concrete pillar, weapon drawn and aimed at the growing opening. A figure appeared in the darkness, hands raised but features invisible against the black interior. "Don't shoot," a woman's voice called out. "Please, we need help. He's dying." She stepped into the light, and I could see she was covered in blood, not splattered, but soaked, like she'd been kneeling in it. Behind her, 2 more figures emerged, supporting a 4th between them. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the supported figure was limp, head lolling. They moved into the light and the scene became clearer. 3 people in their 20s, all covered in blood, trying to carry a 4th who was clearly beyond help. "Put him down and step away," I commanded, trying to process what I was seeing while maintaining control of the situation. They complied, laying the man on the wet concrete. One of them, a young guy in a formerly white t-shirt, started crying. "It was an accident," he kept saying. "We were just trying to help him." The story came out in pieces while we waited for backup and medical. They were urban explorers, people who break into abandoned buildings to take photos and videos. They'd been exploring an old factory when one of their group, Marcus, had fallen through a weakened floor into some kind of industrial equipment. The fall had caused catastrophic injuries. They'd panicked, tried to move him themselves instead of calling 911, made everything worse. They'd brought him to the storage unit because one of them remembered their uncle kept medical supplies there from his time as an EMT. By the time the ambulance arrived, Marcus was gone. The medical examiner confirmed what was obvious from the injuries. The fall had been fatal almost instantly, and moving him had been pointless. The urban explorers were detained, questioned, and eventually released with trespassing charges. Logan Whitfield's car turned out to be stolen. He'd reported it the next morning, said he'd been drunk and couldn't remember where he'd parked it after leaving a bar. Security footage confirmed his story, showing someone else driving it away while Logan stumbled off in the opposite direction. But here's the part that still bothers me. When crime scene techs processed that storage unit, they found things that didn't match the urban explorer's story. There were older bloodstains on the concrete, at least 3 different samples according to forensics. The medical supplies included surgical tools that no EMT would have, things meant for much more invasive procedures. And on the wall, partially hidden behind a shelf, someone had scratched a message. "They made me watch." The unit was registered to a fake name with a fake address, The payment trail led to a prepaid credit card bought with cash. The urban explorers swore they'd never been there before that night, and their story checked out. They'd only ended up there because one of them remembered wrong, thinking it was his uncle's unit when his uncle actually stored things 2 facilities over. A tragic mistake that led them to the wrong place at the worst possible time. We never found out who really rented that unit or what had happened there before. The older blood samples didn't match anyone in the system. The surgical tools had their serial numbers filed off. The investigation went cold after 3 months, officially unsolved but tactically abandoned. Sometimes I drive by that storage facility on my patrols. They've changed the numbering system now, and Unit 47B doesn't exist anymore. But I know exactly which door it was, and sometimes I swear I can still see light flickering underneath it. The worst part about working nights isn't the danger or the weird calls, or even the things you see that you can't unsee. It's knowing that in a city of 1 million people, there are probably dozens of storage units, abandoned buildings, and empty lots where things happen that we'll never know about. Where people like whoever rented that unit do whatever they do, clean up, and disappear into the darkness before anyone even knows to look for them. That night changed how I approach every call, every abandoned vehicle, every open door that should be closed. Because now I know that sometimes the routine calls, the nothing calls, the just check it out calls, are the ones that lead you to places where the real darkness lives. Where someone was made to watch something so terrible they had to scratch a message into the wall, hoping someone would find it, understand it, do something about it. We never did. And that failure follows me through every shift, every patrol, every moment when the city sleeps and I'm out there, supposedly keeping watch. But I know now that I'm not watching for what I can see. I'm watching for what hides just beyond the reach of the streetlights, in storage units and abandoned buildings, waiting for someone to stumble upon it by accident. Or worse, waiting for someone to come looking for it on purpose. My second story takes me back 3 years, before the storage unit incident, when I was still eager and thought every call might be the one that made a difference. The Harbor District, after midnight, was its own ecosystem. Empty warehouses, abandoned shipping containers, and the constant sound of water lapping against rotting piers. Even on busy nights, patrol units avoided it unless specifically called. Too many blind corners, too many places for someone to disappear. The call came in at 1:15 a.m. on a Thursday in March. Kayla wasn't working dispatch that night. Instead, it was a guy named Brett who always sounded like he'd rather be anywhere else. Unit 7, we've got a welfare check at Pier 49. Anonymous caller says they heard someone crying for help from inside one of the containers. Pier 49 was at the ass end of the district, where even the homeless didn't go unless they were desperate. The last legitimate shipping company had pulled out 5 years ago, leaving behind rows of rusted containers stacked like defunct building blocks. The city kept meaning to clean it up, but budget meetings and bureaucracy meant it just sat there, slowly being reclaimed by rust and rats. I arrived to find the pier gate hanging open, its chain cut clean through with what looked like bolt cutters. Fresh cut, too, the metal still bright where it had been severed. The anonymous caller hadn't mentioned that detail. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I entered, revealing rows of containers in various states of decay. Some had their doors hanging open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Others were sealed tight, their locking mechanisms rusted solid. The crying had stopped by the time I got there, which somehow made things worse. Silence in a place like that felt wrong, like the entire pier was holding its breath. I started checking containers methodically, calling out, announcing myself as police. Most were empty except for old shipping pallets and the occasional rat's nest. Then, about 6 rows in, I found one that was different. The container's door was closed but not locked, and there were fresh scratches around the handle like someone had been working at it recently. When I pulled it open, the smell hit me immediately. Not death, but fear. That particular mixture of sweat, urine, and desperation that comes from someone being terrified for an extended period. My flashlight illuminated the interior, and I saw her. Priya Nair, according to the missing persons report I'd later read. 28 years old, had been missing for 3 days after leaving her job at a downtown accounting firm. She was huddled in the back corner of the container, arms wrapped around her knees, wearing the same business suit she'd disappeared in, now torn and filthy. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated despite my flashlight beam hitting her face. "It's okay," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I'm Officer Pierce. I'm here to help you." She didn't respond, just stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I was real. I stepped inside slowly, keeping my hands visible, trying not to make any sudden movements that might spook her. The container was bare except for a bucket in one corner and several water bottles, some empty, some full. "Priya, is that your name? Your family's been looking for you." At the mention of her family, something shifted in her expression. She blinked, seeming to come back to herself slightly. "They said my family was dead," she whispered. "They showed me pictures." Before I could ask who they were, I heard footsteps outside. Multiple sets, moving fast but trying to be quiet. I keyed my radio, calling for immediate backup, giving my exact location. Brett acknowledged, but his response was garbled by static. The Harbor District was a dead zone for radio communication, all the metal interfering with signals. I drew my weapon, positioning myself between Priya and the container door. "Police, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was just the sound of water against the pier and Priya's ragged breathing behind me. Then a voice, calm and professional, called out, "Officer Pierce? This is Detective Carmen Alvarez, Harbor Division. I'm here about the missing person." Something was wrong. Harbor Division had been disbanded 2 years ago, folded into the main department due to budget cuts. Everyone knew that. "Step where I can see you," I called back. "Hands visible." A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light from the pier's few working lamps. Female, medium height, wearing what looked like a detective's badge on her belt. But the badge was wrong. Even in the poor light, I could see it was the old style, the kind they'd stopped using 5 years ago. "Officer Pierce," the woman said again, and her voice was different now, less professional, more urgent. "You need to come with us. This is a federal matter now." Behind her, more figures appeared. 3, maybe 4, all in dark clothing that could have been suits or tactical gear. "I'm not going anywhere until backup arrives," I said, keeping my weapon trained on the doorway. "And this woman needs medical attention." The figure claiming to be Detective Alvarez took a step forward, and I could see her face now. Mid-40s, sharp features, eyes that looked tired but determined. "There is no backup coming, officer. This area's been isolated. Please, just cooperate and everyone goes home safe." That's when Priya grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone who'd been captive for 3 days. "Don't let them take me back," she whispered. "They're not police. They're the ones who took me." The situation crystallized in that moment. 5 people blocking the only exit from a shipping container, claiming authority they didn't have, trying to get me to surrender someone who'd clearly been kidnapped. I shifted my stance, finger moving to the trigger. "Everyone stays where they are until real backup arrives. I've got units en route." The woman smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. "Officer Pierce, You're new to the Harbor District, aren't you? Things work differently down here. Always have. She reached into her jacket slowly, and I tensed, ready to fire. But instead of a weapon, she pulled out a phone. "Make the call," she said to someone behind her. My radio crackled to life. Brett's voice came through, clearer than it should have been given the usual interference. "Unit 7, disregard that backup request. Situation's been handled by federal agents. You're cleared to return to patrol." "Brett, what the hell are you talking about?" I said into the radio. "I need backup now. Multiple suspects, possible kidnapping victim." But there was no response. The radio was dead again. The woman with the phone smiled wider. "See? No one's coming. Now, we can do this easy or hard, but either way, you're leaving here alone." I made a decision then that probably saved both our lives. I grabbed Priya's arm and pulled her behind me, then fired 2 shots into the container's ceiling. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and the supposed Detective Alvarez and her team instinctively ducked back. In that split second, I charged forward, shouldering through them, dragging Priya with me. We ran, through the maze of containers, feet slipping on wet metal and broken concrete. I could hear them behind us, coordinated, calling out positions like they'd done this before. Priya was struggling to keep up in her heels, so I pulled her into an open container, helped her kick them off, then we kept moving. The pier was bigger than I'd realized, stretching back into areas I'd never patrolled. We ended up in what must have been the old loading area, massive cranes looming overhead like dinosaur skeletons. That's where we made our stand. I found a defensible position behind a concrete barrier, called dispatch on my personal phone since the radio was compromised. This time, I got through to the actual police department, not whatever fake setup they'd created. Within minutes, I could hear real sirens, lots of them, converging on the harbor. The fake Detective Alvarez and her team vanished like smoke. By the time real backup arrived, there was no trace of them except for the cut chain on the gate and some footprints in the mud. Priya was taken to the hospital, where she gave a statement about being grabbed outside her apartment, drugged, and kept in various locations before ending up in that container. She said there were others, at least 3 more people being held somewhere, but she didn't know where. The investigation that followed revealed a human trafficking ring operating out of the Harbor District, using the abandoned infrastructure to move people through the city. They had inside help, people in various departments who could redirect calls, cancel backup requests, make reports disappear. Brett, the dispatcher, vanished that same night. His apartment was cleaned out, no forwarding address, no trace of where he'd gone. We found 2 of the other victims Priya had mentioned, both in containers at different piers. 1 survived. The 4th was never found. The woman calling herself Detective Alvarez was never identified. The real Carmen Alvarez had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Someone had been using her identity, her old badge, pretending to be her for God knows how long. The Harbor District got that cleanup after all. The city suddenly found the budget to clear out all the abandoned containers, put up new fencing, install security cameras. They said it was part of a redevelopment initiative, but everyone knew the real reason. They needed to make sure there were no more dark corners where people could disappear, no more metal mazes where fake cops could operate with impunity. I still patrol down there sometimes, though it looks nothing like it used to. Clean, well-lit, sanitized. But on quiet nights, when the fog rolls in off the water, I remember running through those containers with Priya, knowing that the voices on my radio were lying, that backup wasn't coming, that we were on our own in a place where the rules didn't apply. And I wonder how many other places in this city are like that. How many other dispatchers might be compromised. How many other calls for backup might go unanswered. Priya Nair moved back to her hometown after the trial. She sends me a Christmas card every year, always with the same message. Thank you for not leaving me there. I keep them all in my locker at the station. A reminder that sometimes the job isn't about following protocol or waiting for backup. Sometimes it's about recognizing when the system itself has been compromised and making the choice to act anyway, even when every official voice is telling you to stand down. 6 months before the Harbor District incident, I was still learning the rhythms of night patrol. Every experienced officer will tell you that certain calls have a feel to them before you even arrive on scene. Welfare checks were usually straightforward. Concerned family member calls about elderly parent not answering the phone. You show up, they're fine but forgot their hearing aid. Everyone goes home relieved. But the welfare check I got sent to on February 18th at 11:45 p.m. was different from the moment it came through. The dispatcher that night was Monica, an older woman who'd been working the board for 20 years. She had this way of adding subtle emphasis to words that told you more than the official call notes ever could. Unit 7. I need you to respond to a welfare check at 4812 Maple Avenue. Neighbor reports they haven't seen the resident, Malik Jordan, in approximately 1 week. Newspapers piling up, mail overflowing. She paused, then added, Neighbor also reports a smell. Those last 5 words changed everything. A smell meant this wasn't going to be a happy reunion. I drove through the sleeping residential streets, past houses where normal people were living normal lives, completely unaware that a few blocks away, something had gone very wrong. 4812 Maple was a small 2-story house, well maintained from the outside except for what Monica had mentioned. Newspapers scattered on the porch, mailbox stuffed to overflowing. The neighbor who'd called it in was waiting on his own porch when I arrived. Trent Holloway, retired postal worker, the kind of guy who knew everyone's business because he'd been delivering their mail for 30 years. I've been worried about Malik for days, he said, wringing his hands. He's a creature of habit, you know. Every morning at 7, he's out here getting his paper. Every evening at 6, he's on the porch with his coffee, but I haven't seen him in a week. When did you notice the smell? I asked, already knowing this was going to be a recovery, not a rescue. 3 days ago, maybe 4. At first, I thought it was just trash or something, but it's getting stronger. He pointed toward the house. And there's been this car parked out front for the last 2 nights. Dark sedan, tinted windows. It just sits there for hours, then leaves around dawn. That detail made me pause. People don't usually stake out houses where someone's been dead for a week. I made note of it and approached the front door. The smell hit me about 10 feet from the porch, that unmistakable mixture of decomposition and something else. Something chemical. I knocked loudly, announced myself as police, went through the whole routine even though I knew no one would answer. The front door was locked, but I noticed one of the ground floor windows was slightly open, maybe 2 inches. Just enough for the smell to escape, but also just enough for someone to have potentially forced it from the outside. I called for backup and a supervisor, explaining the situation. While waiting, I did a perimeter check with my flashlight. The backyard told a different story than the front. There were fresh footprints in the flower bed beneath what looked like a bedroom window. The back door's deadbolt had fresh scratch marks around it, like someone had tried to pick it recently. And there were cigarette butts near the garage, at least a dozen, all the same brand. Someone had been watching this house, and recently. Backup arrived in the form of Officer Diana Reeves, a veteran who'd seen more death scenes than anyone should have to. We entered through the front door after getting the go-ahead from our sergeant. The smell inside was overwhelming, but there was something wrong about it. Death has a very specific odor, and while that was definitely present, it was mixed with something else. Pine sol, bleach, and another chemical I couldn't identify. We found Malik Jordan in his bedroom on the second floor. He'd been dead for at least a week, natural causes by the look of it. Heart attack or stroke, probably. He was in his bed, peaceful, like he'd just gone to sleep and never woken up. But the room had been cleaned. Recently. The floors still showed streaks from mopping, and the windows had been wiped down. Someone had been in here after he died, but they hadn't moved the body or called it in. That's when I noticed what was missing. The room was too empty. No wallet on the dresser, no watch on the nightstand, no cell phone anywhere. But there were dust outlines where these things should have been, and the dust was disturbed in a pattern that suggested someone had been through here systematically, taking specific items while leaving others. "Pierce," Diana called from downstairs, "you need to see this." In Malik's home office, we found evidence of what he'd really been. The wall was covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes, all connected by red string like something out of a detective movie. But this wasn't about solving crimes. It was about committing them. The clippings were all about a series of home invasions from the 1990s, cases that had gone cold. The photographs showed houses, families, detailed surveillance shots taken from cars and hiding spots. And in the center of it all was a list of names. Some were crossed out with dates next to them going back 20 years. Others were circled with more recent dates. The last name on the list, circled in fresh red ink, was N. Foster. There was an address, a schedule, even photographs of a woman in her 50s who had no idea someone had been planning something terrible for her. We called it in immediately, got units sent to check on N. Foster, who turned out to be Naomi Foster, a retired nurse living alone on the other side of town. She was fine, hadn't noticed anything unusual, but when officers checked her property, they found the same signs we'd found at Malik's. Cigarette butts by the garage, footprints under windows, scratch marks on door locks. Someone had been casing her house just like they'd been watching Malik's. The investigation revealed that Malik Jordan had been the last surviving member of a crew that had terrorized the city in the 90s. They'd done home invasions, but not for money. They did it for the thrill, for the power, picking victims carefully and documenting everything. Malik had kept all the evidence, all the trophies, right there in his house. And when he died, someone else who knew about it had come looking. We never figured out who'd been in Malik's house after he died. The cigarette butts had no DNA matches in the system. The dark sedan Trent had seen was never found. But whoever it was, they'd taken specific items. Anything that might have identified the other members of the crew, any evidence that could have linked the crimes to people still living. They'd left the trophy wall intact, maybe as a message, maybe because they ran out of time. Naomi Foster moved in with her daughter the next week. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even with increased patrols in her neighborhood. The other names on Malik's list were contacted, warned, offered protection. Most of them had no idea they'd been targeted by someone who'd been selecting victims for 20 years, patiently waiting for the right moment that never came because his heart gave out first. The house at 4812 Maple sat empty for months before being demolished. The city claimed it was due to structural issues, but everyone knew the real reason. Too much evil had been planned within those walls. Too many victims selected and stalked, photographed and scheduled. Even if someone could have lived there, knowing what we found, who would want to? But what keeps me up at night isn't what Malik Jordan did or planned to do. It's knowing that someone else out there knew about it all along. Someone who waited until he was dead to come collect evidence, to clean up loose ends, to make sure certain secrets stayed buried. They're still out there, walking free, carrying knowledge of crimes we'll never fully understand. The dark sedan still shows up sometimes in reports. Officers mention seeing it parked outside houses where welfare checks get called in, always gone by the time units arrive. Could be coincidence, could be paranoia, could be something else entirely. But every time I hear about it, I think about that cleaned bedroom, those missing items, and wonder what other secrets are being protected by someone who seems to know exactly when death creates an opportunity. This last incident happened just 2 months ago, still fresh enough that I wake up some nights thinking about it. It was a Wednesday in September, one of those end-of-summer nights when the heat still clings to the pavement even after midnight. I was working the North Sector, the part of the city where industrial areas bleed into residential neighborhoods, creating these weird pockets where factories sit next to family homes. The call wasn't even for me initially. Unit 3 had been dispatched to a noise complaint at an abandoned textile factory on Industrial Row. Kids partying, the caller had assumed. But Unit 3 had to respond to a domestic violence situation, so dispatch rerouted it to me. Monica was back on the board that night, and she gave me the rundown. Anonymous caller reported loud music and voices from the old Brennan Textile building. Says it's been going on for about an hour. The Brennan factory had been closed since 2008, another casualty of the recession. 15 years of decay had turned it into a massive brick skeleton, all broken windows and rusted fire escapes. The city kept threatening to tear it down, but asbestos concerns and bureaucratic red tape meant it just sat there, slowly collapsing in on itself. I arrived at 12:33 a.m. The factory loomed against the night sky, 5 stories of dead windows reflecting nothing but darkness. But the caller had been right about one thing. I could hear music, not loud, but persistent, echoing from somewhere inside the building. It wasn't the usual trash rap or metal that kids played at their parties. This was older, stranger. Big band music from the 1940s, the kind my grandmother used to listen to. The main entrance had been chained shut years ago, but chains only work if someone maintains them. These had been cut, probably months ago, leaving the doors hanging open like a mouth. I called it in, letting Monica know I was investigating a possible trespassing situation. She reminded me to wait for backup if needed, but we both knew how thin resources were stretched on a Wednesday night. The music got louder as I entered, my flashlight cutting through the darkness to reveal a massive empty space that had once been the main factory floor. Debris everywhere, broken glass crunching under my boots, graffiti covering every surface within reach. But there was a path through the debris, worn clean by frequent foot traffic. Someone had been coming here regularly. I followed the path and the music, which seemed to be coming from the second floor. The stairs were concrete, sturdy despite the years, though the handrail had long since been stripped for scrap metal. As I climbed, I noticed something that made me slow down. Fresh scratches on the walls, like someone had been dragged up these stairs, their fingers clawing at the concrete for purchase. The second floor was divided into smaller rooms, probably former offices. The music was coming from the far end of the hallway, along with what sounded like voices. Multiple people, talking and laughing. But something was off about the sound. It was too rhythmic, too repetitive, like a recording being played on a loop. I moved down the hallway carefully, checking each room as I passed. Empty. Empty, empty, and then not empty. In the fourth room, I found them. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all in their 20s, sitting in folding chairs arranged in a circle. They were dressed strangely, wearing clothes that looked vintage, like they'd raided a costume shop specializing in the 1940s. They didn't react to my flashlight or my presence, just sat there, staring at the center of their circle where a 4th chair sat empty. "Police," I announced. "I need you all to stand up slowly and keep your hands where I can see them." They turned to look at me in unison, a synchronized movement that sent chills down my spine. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Officer Pierce," she said, and I felt my blood run cold. I hadn't told them my name. "We've been waiting for you. He said you'd come." Before I could ask who he was, the music cut out abruptly, plunging us into silence except for the sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. Slow, measured steps that echoed off the walls. I turned, hand on my weapon, to see a man approaching. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a suit that had probably been expensive once but was now worn and stained. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken, but there was something familiar about him that I couldn't place. "Officer Pierce," he said, his voice carrying despite barely being above a whisper. "I'm sorry you had to be the one. But every story needs a witness, and tonight you're ours." That's when I realized where I'd seen him before. His picture had been in the paper 6 months ago. Robert Tesler, a former city councilman who'd gone missing after being indicted for embezzlement. His family thought he'd fled the country, but here he was, looking like he'd aged 20 years in 6 months, orchestrating something in an abandoned factory. "Mr. Tesler, you're wanted for questioning. I need you to come with me." I kept my voice steady, professional, even though every instinct was screaming that something was seriously wrong here. He laughed, a dry sound like paper rustling. "I can't leave, officer. None of us can. We're bound here now, part of something bigger. But you're still free, unless..." He gestured to the empty chair in the circle. "Unless you'd like to understand, to see what we've seen." The 3 younger people stood up then, moving with that same synchronized precision. They started walking toward me, not threatening exactly, but purposeful. I drew my weapon then, ordering them to stop, but they kept coming. Not running, not aggressive, just walking steadily forward with those empty smiles. I backed into the hallway, keeping my weapon trained on them while calling for immediate backup. Monica's voice crackled through the radio, but there was interference, static that formed almost words that I couldn't quite understand. The 3 people stopped at the doorway, watching me retreat but not following. Behind them, Tesler had taken a seat in the previously empty chair, his head tilted back like he was listening to something only he could hear. That's when the building's lights came on. Not all of them, most had been dead for years, but enough to illuminate the hallway in a sick yellow glow. The lights shouldn't have worked. The building had been disconnected from the power grid for over a decade. But there they were, flickering like they were powered by something unstable. At the end of the hallway, a door I hadn't noticed before was now visible, painted red and marked with symbols I didn't recognize. It was opening slowly, and from behind it came a sound that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite voices, but something in between. The 3 people in vintage clothes turned toward it, their faces lighting up with an expression of terrible joy. "It's time," the woman said. "He's ready to receive another one." I didn't wait to find out what that meant. I ran. Down the stairs, through the factory floor, out into the night where my patrol car sat under a streetlight that suddenly seemed like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I called for backup again, this time getting through clearly. Multiple units responded, and within 15 minutes we had the building surrounded. But when we went back in, the building was empty. No Tesler, no 3 people in vintage clothes, no red door at the end of the second-floor hallway. Just an abandoned factory with years of accumulated debris. The only evidence that anything had happened was the fresh footprints in the dust, including my own, and a single folding chair sitting in the middle of an otherwise empty room. The investigation turned up nothing. Robert Tesler was still officially missing. No one matching the description of the 3 young people was reported missing or wanted. The building had no power connection. No way those lights could have turned on. The only thing we found was a section of wall in that second-floor room where someone had recently painted over older graffiti. When forensics used chemicals to reveal what was underneath, they found a list of names and dates going back 50 years. The last entry, added in what looked like fresh paint, was my name and that night's date, followed by a question mark. The factory was demolished 3 weeks later. Emergency demolition, the city called it, due to structural instabilities. I watched from across the street as the wrecking ball reduced it to rubble. But even as the building came down, I could swear I heard that big band music, faint but persistent, playing somewhere in the dust and destruction. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head. I've read about shared delusions, mass hysteria, all the psychological explanations for what multiple people think they experience together. But I know what I saw. Those people were there, Tesla was there, and something was happening in that building that existed outside normal understanding. The question mark after my name haunts me. Like I was supposed to be part of whatever they were doing, but I chose to run instead. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd sat in that empty chair, if I'd chosen to understand, as Tesla put it. But then I remember the expression on those 3 young faces, that empty joy, that synchronized movement, and I know I made the right choice. Monica retired last week. On her last shift, she pulled me aside and told me something that made my blood run cold. She said that over her 20 years on dispatch, she'd sent 5 different officers to that factory for various calls. I was the only one who ever reported finding people inside. The others all said it was empty, just kids' parties that had ended before they arrived. But each of those officers had quit within a year of their visit, citing stress, burnout, or personal reasons. She'd kept track because it seemed strange, but never reported it because what would she say? I'm still working nights, still patrolling the same sectors, still responding to the same types of calls. But now I know that there are places in this city where things happen that can't be explained by crime statistics or psychological profiles. Places where missing people gather to do things that exist outside the normal understanding of law and order. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the radio is silent and the streets are empty, I find myself wondering how many other Officer Pierces have stood in similar rooms, faced similar choices, and what happened to the ones who didn't run. The city is full of abandoned buildings, empty lots, and forgotten spaces. Most of them are just what they appear to be. Urban decay, economic casualties, nothing more. But some of them are something else, something that operates on its own rules, its own timeline, its own purpose. And we patrol past them every night, never knowing which ones harbor secrets that would shatter our understanding of what's possible. That's the real horror of working these streets after midnight. It's not the violence or the tragedy or even the unexplainable events. It's knowing that the thin blue line we talk about isn't just between order and chaos. Sometimes it's between the world we understand and something else entirely, something that's always been here, waiting in the abandoned places for someone curious enough, desperate enough, or unlucky enough to find it. My name is still on a wall somewhere in that rubble, with a question mark that will never be answered. And every night when I put on my uniform and head out into the darkness, I carry that question with me. Not whether I'll encounter something like that again, but when. And whether next time I'll have the strength to run. Because here's what they don't tell you at the academy. Protecting and serving sometimes means protecting people from things that shouldn't exist. Serving a community that doesn't know what lurks in its abandoned corners. We write our reports, file our paperwork, and never mention the things that don't fit in the official narrative. We just keep patrolling, keep responding, keep facing whatever waits in the darkness with nothing but a badge, a gun, and the hope that tomorrow's shift will be normal. But after what I've seen, I know normal is just what we call the things we can explain. Everything else gets buried in vague reports, dismissed as confusion or stress, rationalized away until it's just another story that officers tell each other in the break room, half joking, half warning. Stories about storage units with mysterious bloodstains, trafficking rings that operate above the law, welfare checks that reveal decades-old conspiracies, and abandoned factories where missing people gather for purposes we'll never understand. These are my stories. 4 incidents out of hundreds, maybe thousands, of calls I've responded to over 6 years. 4 moments when the routine turned into something else. When the city showed me its hidden face. When I learned that the night shift isn't just about crime and tragedy. It's about standing watch against things that don't have names, can't be categorized, and won't fit into any report I could write. And tomorrow night, I'll put on my uniform again, check my equipment, and head out into the darkness. Because someone has to. Because most nights are normal. Because the city needs us to stand between its citizens and whatever lurks in the abandoned places, the forgotten corners, the spaces between what we know and what we fear. My name is Officer Jonathan Pierce. I work the night shift. And these are the things I've seen when the city sleeps, and the neon dies, and the only light comes from my flashlight cutting through the darkness, searching for answers to questions I'm not sure I want to ask. The radio just crackled to life. Another call, another address, another chance to find out what waits in the darkness. My name is Officer Danielle Brooks. I've been working the night shift for about 7 years. There's something about the hours between midnight and dawn that changes places and people, making familiar things feel foreign. I had gone to the Grandview Apartments on Fletcher Street for a routine disturbance call. The scene I encountered there was something my nearly 7 years of professional experience hadn't prepared me for. It was a Tuesday night in October, the kind where the air has that first real bite of autumn cold that makes you grateful for the heater in your patrol car. I was working the East Sector alone. My usual partner, Rodriguez, out with a back injury he'd gotten chasing a purse snatcher through a construction site the week before. The streets were quieter than usual, that deep kind of quiet you only get on weeknights when even the bars have given up and closed early. The call came through at exactly 3:07 a.m. I remember the time specifically because I'd just been looking at the dashboard clock, calculating how many hours until my shift ended, when dispatch crackled to life. It was Sandra on the board that night, a younger woman who'd only been working dispatch for about 6 months, but had already developed that calm, measured tone that all good dispatchers eventually master. Unit 12, we have a complaint about a flickering light at 451 Fletcher Street, the Grandview Apartments. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Caller states the light has been turning on and off repeatedly for the past hour, disturbing other residents. It seemed like such a nothing call at the time. A bad bulb, maybe some electrical issue, probably just needed someone to knock on the door and tell whoever lived there to fix their light or turn it off. I'd handled dozens of similar complaints over the years. Noise complaints, light complaints, smell complaints. The petty grievances that people only seem to care about in the middle of the night when they can't sleep and need someone else to blame. Unit 12 responding, I said into my radio, already pulling away from the gas station where I'd been parked, watching for speeders on the main drag. ETA 5 minutes. The Grandview Apartments sat on the edge of what we called the transition zone, where the nicer parts of downtown gradually gave way to the rougher neighborhoods further east. It was a 6-story brick building from the 1920s, the kind they used to build with character before everything became glass and steel. But 90 years of minimal maintenance had taken its toll. The bricks were stained with decades of city grime. The windows were a mismatched collection of replacements from different eras, and the whole structure had a slight lean to it that made you wonder how it passed its last inspection. I pulled into the small parking lot beside the building at 3:13 a.m. Only a handful of cars sat. In the spaces, most of them older models with rust eating at their edges and expired tags that nobody bothered to enforce in this part of town. The building's entrance was a heavy wooden door with a brass handle worn smooth by countless hands. Next to it, an intercom system that looked like it hadn't worked since the Carter administration hung uselessly from the wall, its wires exposed and corroded. The door was propped open with a brick, which wasn't unusual for buildings like this. Residents got tired of buzzers that didn't work and locks that stuck, so they found their own solutions. I pushed through into a lobby that smelled of old carpet and something else, something chemical and sharp that made my nose wrinkle. The overhead fluorescent light flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across peeling wallpaper decorated with what might have once been roses, but now looked more like bloodstains faded by time. An old man sat behind a desk that served as the building's security station, though calling it security was generous. He was reading a paperback novel, the kind with a lurid cover featuring a woman in torn clothing fleeing from a shadowy figure. When he looked up at me, I recognized him immediately. Malik Jordan, a fixture in the neighborhood who'd been working as a building superintendent or security guard at various properties for as long as anyone could remember. "Evening, Malik," I said, approaching the desk. "Or morning, I guess. You get a complaint about apartment 3B. Malik set down his book, his weathered face creasing into a frown. He was probably in his 70s, maybe older, with gray hair that he kept short and neat, despite everything else about him suggesting he'd given up on appearances long ago. His security uniform was at least 2 sizes too large, hanging off his thin frame like a child playing dress-up. "Officer Brooks," he said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. "Yeah, Mrs. Johnson from 3A called down about an hour ago. Said the light in 3B keeps flashing and she can see it under the door. Thing is, 3B's been vacant for 3 months now." That made me pause. "Vacant? You sure?" "Positive. Tenant moved out in July, didn't leave a forwarding address. We haven't been able to rent it since. Market's tough, and this building..." He gestured vaguely at the decay around us. "Well, it ain't exactly luxury living. So nobody should be in there? Nobody's got a key except me and the property management company, and they sure as hell aren't here at 3 a.m. Malik stood up, his joints popping audibly. "I was about to go check it myself, but then you showed up. Figured it's better to let the professionals handle it." I nodded, though something about the situation was already making the hair on my neck stand up. Empty apartments don't have lights that turn on and off by themselves. Either someone had broken in, or there was an electrical problem that could potentially be dangerous. Either way, it needed to be checked. "You want to come up with me?" I asked. "Bring the keys?" Malik grabbed a massive ring of keys from a hook on the wall, easily 50 keys jangling together like wind chimes. "Lead the way, officer. These old bones don't move as fast as they used to." We took the stairs because the elevator, according to a handwritten sign taped to its doors, had been temporarily out of service since 2019. The stairwell was narrow and poorly lit, with that distinctive smell of old buildings that never quite goes away no matter how much pine sol you use. Our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, creating a rhythm that seemed too loud in the nighttime quiet. On the second-floor landing, we passed an apartment with music playing softly behind the door. Something classical that seemed out of place in a building like this. The third-floor hallway stretched before us, lit by a single bulb at each end, leaving the middle in semi-darkness. The carpet here was a different pattern than downstairs. A dizzying geometric design in browns and oranges that probably looked modern in 1975. Apartment 3. A was the first door on the left, and I could see light leaking from underneath it despite the late hour. Mrs. Johnson was awake, probably listening for us. Across the hall, apartment 3B's door stood closed and dark, except for what Malik had described. A rhythmic flashing of light visible in the crack beneath the door. On for 3 seconds, off for 2, on for 3 seconds, off for 2. The pattern was too regular to be random, too consistent to be electrical short. I knocked on the door firmly. "Police? Is anyone in there?" The light continued its pattern, but there was no response from inside. I knocked again, louder this time, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. Still nothing except that steady pulse of light. I looked at Malik, who was fumbling with his keys, trying to find the right one in the dim hallway light. "Here we go," he said finally, inserting a key into the deadbolt. It turned with a grinding sound that suggested it hadn't been used recently. But when he tried to push the door open, it only moved a few inches before stopping. "What the hell?" I moved closer, shining my flashlight through the gap. A chain lock was engaged from the inside, the kind you can only fasten if you're in the apartment. My hand moved instinctively to my service weapon, though I didn't draw it yet. "Someone's definitely in there," I said quietly. "Police! Open the door now." The light stopped flashing. For a moment, there was absolute darkness beyond the door. Then, suddenly, every light in the apartment blazed on at once, so bright that it hurt to look directly at the gap. Then, just as suddenly, they all went out again. The pattern resumed, 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off. Should I call for backup? I asked myself as much as Malik, who had taken several steps back from the door, his face pale in the hallway light. "Might not be a bad idea," he said. "I've been working this building for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this." But before I could reach for my radio, we heard something from inside the apartment. Not voices, not footsteps, but a sound like paper being crumpled or shuffled. Lots of paper. The rustling went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. The light continued its hypnotic pattern. I made a decision that, looking back, probably wasn't the smartest one. But after 7 years on the force, you develop instincts about situations, and something told me this wasn't dangerous in the conventional sense. Strange, yes. Unsettling, absolutely, but not immediately threatening. "Malik, you got bolt cutters in your office?" He nodded. "Bottom drawer of the desk." "You want me to—" "Stay here, watch the door. If anyone comes out, radio dispatch immediately." I gave him my radio, showing him the transmit button, then headed back down the stairs at a jog. The building seemed even quieter now, as if it was holding its breath. In Malik's office, I found the bolt cutters exactly where he'd said they'd be, along with a few other tools that might be useful. I grabbed them all and headed back up. Malik was still standing in the hallway, but he'd been joined by a woman in a faded pink bathrobe and slippers. Mrs. Johnson, I assumed. She was probably in her 60s, with gray-streaked black hair pulled back in a loose bun, and the kind of deeply lined face that suggested she'd seen more than her share of hard times. "Is someone finally going to do something about that light?" she demanded when she saw me approaching. "It's been going for over an hour now. How am I supposed to sleep with that flashing under my door?" "We're handling it, ma'am," I assured her, but I need you to go back to your apartment and lock the door. Just as a precaution. She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced her. She retreated to her apartment, though I heard the distinctive sound of her pressing her ear against the door as soon as she closed it. The chain lock was heavy-duty but old, and the bolt cutters went through it like butter. The door swung open slowly, revealing an apartment lit only by a single table lamp that was indeed turning on and off in that steady rhythm. But that wasn't what made both Malik and me freeze in the doorway. The apartment was full of shopping receipts. Not just a few, not just scattered around, but thousands of them. They covered every surface. The floor, the counters, the threadbare couch, even taped to the walls in neat rows. Each one was carefully flattened and arranged, creating a paper carpet that rustled with the air movement from the open door. They were organized by store, by date, by amount, in a system that must have taken weeks or months to complete. In the center of the living room, a card table had been set up with a single chair. On the table was a piece of paper with writing on it, a pen beside it as if someone had just set it down. The lamp, causing all the trouble, sat on the same table, plugged into a timer that clicked audibly each time it cycled. But what caught my attention was the bathroom door, visible down a short hallway, closed and with a towel stuffed under the gap at the bottom. "What in the hell?" Malik whispered behind me. I stepped carefully into the apartment, trying not to disturb the receipts more than necessary. They crunched under my boots, and I could see they ranged from recent to decades old, some so faded they were barely legible. Grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants, clothing stores, every kind of purchase imaginable was documented here. The paper on the table was a letter, handwritten in neat cursive that looked almost archaic in its formality. To whoever finds this, I have been watching the patterns for 43 years. Every purchase, every transaction, every exchange of money leaves a trace. And in those traces, I found the truth. They think we don't notice, but I noticed. I documented everything. The third floor is where it happens. Always the third floor. Count the receipts from the third of every month. Count them, and you'll see the pattern too. 307, 317, 327, always the sevens. They come in the sevens. I'm in the bathroom now. I sealed the door, but I can still hear them in the pipes. They use the water, you see. Sound travels through water better than air. They've been talking to me for weeks, telling me to stop collecting, to stop documenting. But I won't stop. I can't stop. If you're reading this, then the timer worked. The light brought you here at the right time. 3:07, just like they always come. But you're not them, are you? You're like me, trying to understand. Look in the bathroom, but be careful. They might still be in the pipes. The letter wasn't signed, but at the bottom was a receipt from a coffee shop dated 3 days ago, the timestamp reading exactly 3:07 p.m. I looked at my watch. 3:31 a.m. We'd been in the apartment for just over 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The lamp continued its mechanical rhythm, and now that I was inside, I could hear something else. A sound like water running, very faint, coming from the direction of the bathroom. "We need to check the bathroom," I said to Malik, though every instinct was telling me to call for backup and let someone else deal with whatever was behind that door. "I'm not going near that bathroom," Malik said flatly. "I've seen enough horror movies to know how this ends." I couldn't blame him, but I had a job to do. I approached the bathroom door slowly, noting that the towel stuffed under it was damp. The doorknob was standard, nothing special, but when I tried to turn it, it was locked from the inside. The water sound was clearer now, not quite running, but more like percolating, bubbling. "Police! If anyone's in there, respond now." silence except for that water sound. I was about to radio for backup. Malik still had my radio when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, faint and distorted, coming from behind the door. But not from inside the bathroom. From below it. From the pipes. 307. Malik heard it too. I saw his face go white, and he took several quick steps backward. Nope, number. I'm calling 911. This is above my pay grade. He fumbled with my radio while I stood frozen at the bathroom door, trying to process what I was hearing. The voice came again, clearer this time, definitely from the plumbing. 3rd floor, 7. I'd been a cop long enough to know that voices don't come from pipes. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone in another apartment. Sound traveling through the plumbing system. Maybe a radio or TV echoing through the walls. But the timing, the words, the whole situation was making my skin crawl. I made another decision, this one definitely smarter than going in alone. Malik, we're backing out. Seal the apartment, call for backup and management. Nobody goes in until we figure out what's happening here. But as we started to leave, the lamp suddenly stopped its pattern. The apartment plunged into darkness for a moment. Then every light in the place blazed on at once. Overhead fixtures I hadn't even noticed. Lamps in the bedroom visible through the doorway. Even what looked like Christmas lights strung along the walls, hidden behind the receipts. The sudden brightness was blinding, and in that moment of disorientation we heard it clearly, the bathroom door unlocking from the inside. I drew my weapon then, training it on the bathroom door as it slowly swung open. Steam billowed out, thick and white, carrying with it the smell of sulfur and something else, something organic and wrong. Through the steam I could see the bathroom was flooded, water overflowing from the tub, the sink, even seeming to bubble up from the toilet. But the water wasn't clear. It was dark, almost black, with an oily sheen that reflected the harsh light in rainbow patterns. "Back up," I ordered Malik, who didn't need to be told twice. He was already at the apartment door, radio in hand, calling for every unit in the area. The steam began to clear, and I could see into the bathroom properly. The walls were covered in more receipts, but these were different. They were all from the same store, all dated the 3rd of different months, all time-stamped at variations of 7, 107, 217, 427. In the center of the floor, surrounded by the black water, was a heap of what looked like clothing and personal effects. Wallet, keys, a watch still ticking, but no person, no body, just possessions arranged almost ceremonially, and that black water that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I watched, weapon still drawn, as bubbles rose from the drain in the bathtub, each one releasing a sound when it popped. Fragments of words, numbers, whispers, in a voice I couldn't identify as male or female, human or something else. All units, I heard Malik saying into the radio. "We need backup at the Grandview Apartments. 451 Fletcher, Apartment 3B. We have a situation. Possible 10 to 54 inches, 10-54. Possible dead body. Except there was no body, just evidence that someone had been here, had set all this up, and had then, dissolved, disappeared, been pulled down the drain?" The water was rising, spilling out of the bathroom and onto the receipt-covered floor. Where it touched the papers, they didn't get wet. They turned black and disintegrated into a fine ash that swirled in patterns that looked almost like writing. I backed up further, keeping my weapon trained on the bathroom doorway, though I had no idea what I would do if something actually emerged. That's when I noticed the letter on the table had changed. The same handwriting, but different words. "You came at 3:07 just as planned. But you're too late." I'm already in the system now. In every pipe, every drain, every faucet in the building. They tried to silence me, but water has memory. Water remembers everything. Check the other apartments. Check them all. We're all in the system now. The lights suddenly cut out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. I heard Malik scream, heard him stumbling toward the door, heard the receipts rustling, as if moved by a wind that shouldn't exist in a closed apartment. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the bathroom where the black water continued to rise, continued to bubble, continued to whisper numbers and fragments of words that almost but didn't quite make sense. Then, as suddenly as they'd gone out, the lights came back on. But the apartment was different. The receipts were gone. Not scattered or disturbed, but completely vanished as if they'd never been there. The bathroom was dry, showing no sign of flooding or black water. The letter on the table was now just a blank piece of paper with a pen beside it. Only the lamp remained, still cycling through its pattern, 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off. Malik was pressed against the doorframe, eyes wide, breathing hard. "Did you see? Did that really?" "I saw it," I confirmed, though I wasn't sure what it was. "We need to evacuate the building, now." But even as I said it, we heard them. Doors opening up and down the hallway. Residents emerging from their apartments, all of them moving with the same measured pace, all of them heading toward the stairwell. Not running, not panicking, just walking with purpose. Mrs. Johnson passed us, her eyes vacant, not responding when I called her name. An elderly man from 3C, a young couple from 3D, all moving in that same synchronized way. "What's happening to them?" Malik whispered. I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the stairs. "We need to get out, call it in from outside, get everyone out." But when we reached the stairwell, we found it full of residents from other floors, all moving upward, toward the higher floors. Their faces blank, their movement coordinated like they were all hearing the same instructions. We pushed past them, fighting against the tide of bodies, Malik clutching my arm as we descended. The second floor was emptying, residents filing out of their apartments and heading up. The first floor was deserted except for the lobby, where more people stood in a perfect grid pattern, all facing the same direction, all completely silent. We burst out of the building into the cool October night, and I immediately called for every available unit, for fire, for EMS, for anyone who could help. Within minutes, the street was full of emergency vehicles, their lights painting the building in reds and blues. But when we tried to go back in, when the other officers tried to enter, the building was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Every apartment door standing open, every unit vacant, no sign of the dozens of residents we'd seen. The only evidence that anyone had been there at all was in apartment 3B, where the lamp continued its rhythm and a new message had appeared on the previously blank paper. 307. They came at 307. They return at 307. We are all in the system now. The building was condemned the next day. The official report cited structural issues, but those of us who were there knew better. The residents were never found. Missing persons reports were filed, investigations launched, but it was as if they'd simply vanished into the infrastructure of the building itself. Into the pipes, as the letter had said. The 24 hours following the incident at the Grandview Apartments were some of the most surreal of my career. By dawn, the building had been wrapped in crime scene tape, and every agency you could think of had descended on Fletcher Street. FBI, state police, even someone from Homeland Security who never quite explained what interest they had in a bunch of missing tenants from a rundown apartment building. I'd been up for 22 hours straight by the time they finally let me go home that Wednesday afternoon. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black water bubbling up from the drains. heard those whispered numbers, remembered the blank faces of the residents as they walked past us toward whatever had called them upward. The official debriefing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived at the precinct to find the conference room packed with people I'd never seen before. Federal agents in suits that probably cost more than I made in a month, forensic specialists with equipment I couldn't even identify, and a woman who introduced herself only as Dr. Sarah Heisman, a specialist in anomalous events from some government department I'd never heard of. Captain Rodriguez led the briefing. He looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight, the bags under his eyes deeper than usual, his typically perfect uniform slightly rumpled. He started by establishing the facts. 43 residents were missing, the entire population of the Grandview apartments except for Malik Jordan, who'd been with me when the incident occurred. No bodies had been found, no sign of struggle, no logical explanation for how 43 people could simply vanish from a 6-story building while it was surrounded by police. "Officer Brooks," Dr. Heisman said when the captain finished. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of intense focus that made you feel like you were being dissected. "Tell us again about the receipts." I'd already been over it 3 times with 3 different investigators, but I repeated the story. The thousands of receipts covering every surface, the letter about patterns and the number 7, the way they'd all vanished when the lights went out. "And you're certain about the timestamp on that coffee shop receipt? 3:07 p.m.? "Positive. I have a good memory for details like that." She made a note on her tablet. "Were any of the other receipts visible enough for you to read the timestamps?" I thought back, trying to picture the scene before it all went insane. "Some of them. Now that you mention it, I remember seeing several that had times ending in 7, 2:17, 4:47, that kind of thing." "Interesting." She pulled up something on her tablet and showed it to the room. A graph with data points clustered around certain times. "We've been analyzing purchase records from the area around the Grandview apartments. In the past 5 years, there's been a statistically significant spike in transactions at times ending in 7, particularly 3:07, but only from residents of that specific building." "What does that mean?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "We're not sure yet, but it suggests some kind of pattern or compulsion affecting the residents. Officer Brooks, the letter mentioned someone had been watching the patterns for 43 years. 43 residents are missing. It can't be a coincidence." The briefing continued for another 2 hours, with various experts presenting theories that ranged from mass hysteria to chemical contamination to, in one federal agent's words, coordinated terrorism using unknown methods. But nobody could explain the black water, the voices in the pipes, or how 43 people could disappear without a trace. I was assigned to the investigative task force, partly because I'd witnessed the event and partly because I knew the neighborhood better than the federal agents who'd taken over the case. My first assignment was to track down the history of apartment 3B, to figure out who'd been living there before it became vacant, and who might have set up that elaborate display of receipts. The property management company, Eastside Rentals, had an office in a strip mall about 10 minutes from the precinct. It was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Wood paneling on the walls, orange carpet that had probably once been brown, and a persistent smell of cigarette smoke despite the no smoking sign on the door. The property manager was a woman named Diane Kraft, mid-50s, with the tired look of someone who'd been dealing with difficult tenants and broken appliances for too long. She pulled out a filing cabinet that looked like it might collapse at any moment and extracted a folder marked Grandview, Unit 3B. "Harold Simmons," she said, reading from the file. Rented the unit from 1979 until this past July. Always paid his rent on time, never any complaints. Well, except from other tenants about him going through the building's trash. Going through the trash? Looking for receipts, apparently. Had some kind of obsession with them, but he was harmless, you know. Just one of those eccentric types you get in old buildings. Kept to himself, mostly. Why did he move out? Diane flipped through the papers. It says here he didn't actually move out. He just stopped being there. Rent was paid up through July, automatic transfer from his bank account. When we went to check on him in August, the apartment was empty except for some furniture. No receipts, no personal belongings, nothing. We figured he'd moved out and forgot to tell us. Happens more than you'd think with the older tenants. Did he leave a forwarding address? Next of kin? Nothing. Like I said, he kept to himself. In 40-plus years, I don't think anyone ever visited him. Mail piled up for a while, but it was all junk. Eventually, we had it forwarded to the post office's dead letter department. She gave me Harold's bank information and his emergency contact, which turned out to be a nephew in Oregon who hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. But when I called the bank, I discovered something interesting. Harold's account was still active, still making automatic payments to various utilities and services, including a storage unit across town. The storage facility was one of those climate-controlled places that catered to people with valuables they couldn't keep at home. Unit 307, another 7, was paid up through the end of the year. The manager, after checking my credentials and making a few phone calls, agreed to let me see inside. The unit was meticulous. Bankers' boxes lined the walls, each labeled with dates going back decades. Inside were receipts, thousands upon thousands of them, all carefully organized and cataloged. But these weren't Harold's receipts. Each box was labeled with a different name, a different apartment number from the Grandview building. He'd been collecting receipts from all his neighbors for 40 years. In the center of the unit was a desk with a computer that looked like it hadn't been updated since Windows 95. When the tech specialist from our department managed to get it running, we found spreadsheets, databases, charts tracking purchasing patterns, times, amounts. Harold had been conducting his own investigation into something, though what that something was remained unclear. But the real discovery was in a notebook we found in the bottom drawer of the desk. Harold's handwriting, cramped and increasingly frantic as the pages progressed. They think I'm crazy, but I can see it now. The building isn't just a building, it's a collection point. Every transaction, every exchange of energy, money is energy, time is energy, life is energy, feeds something. The pipes are conduits. The water carries more than water. 307. Always 307. That's when the barrier is thinnest, when they can reach through. I've tried to warn the others, but they don't listen. They can't see the patterns like I can. The receipts are evidence, proof that we're being harvested, one small transaction at a time. But it's accelerating. The intervals are getting shorter. Used to be once a month, then once a week. Now it's almost daily. I can hear them in the pipes at night. They promise things, show me things. Other places, other buildings, all connected by water and waste and the endless flow of commerce. Every city has them. Every building of a certain age, a certain construction, a certain significance. I'm going to try something. Going to use their own system against them. If you're reading this, then it worked, and you found the evidence, the receipts, the pattern, the truth. Look for the 7s. Always 7s. 7 floors. The 6th floor's a lie. Check the blueprints. 7 units per floor originally. Built in 1917, there's that 7 again. I won't be here when you read this. I'll be in the system by then. We all will be, eventually. But maybe, if someone understands, if someone sees the pattern, it can be stopped. Or maybe it's already too late. Check the water. Always check the water. I photocopied the notebook and added it to the evidence file. But something Harold had written stuck with me. Check the blueprints. So I did. I went to the city planning office and pulled the original architectural drawings for the Grandview apartments. Harold was right. The building had been designed with 7 floors, but only 6 had been built. The 7th floor existed only on paper, a future expansion that never happened. But when I looked closer at the plans, I noticed something odd. The infrastructure for the 7th floor, the plumbing, the electrical, even the elevator shaft, had all been completed. They'd built everything except the actual floor itself, which meant there was an entire network of pipes and conduits above the 6th floor, in the space between the top apartments and the roof. A hidden system that nobody knew about except whoever had studied these blueprints. I brought this information back to the task force, and within hours, we had a team ready to investigate the hidden space. The building had been evacuated and sealed, but we got clearance to enter with a full forensics unit and, at Dr. Heisman's insistence, a team of hazmat specialists. The access point was through a maintenance hatch in the 6th floor hallway ceiling, painted over so many times it was almost invisible. It took a crowbar to get it open, and when we did, a rush of warm, humid air escaped, carrying with it that same sulfur smell I'd noticed in apartment 3B. I volunteered to go up first, despite every instinct telling me it was a bad idea. They fitted me with a hazmat suit, a camera, and enough lights to illuminate a football field. The metal ladder was sturdy, but coated with a slippery substance that made climbing treacherous. When I finally emerged into the space above, I understood why the air was so humid. The entire area was a maze of pipes, all of them sweating condensation, all of them warm to the touch despite the building's heating being turned off. The pipes ranged from tiny capillaries no thicker than a finger to massive main lines that must have been 3 feet in diameter. And they were all wrong. They didn't follow any logical pattern, didn't connect to anything they should have. Some ran in circles, others spiraled up into the darkness above, and still others seemed to phase in and out of the walls as if the building's structure was more suggestion than reality. But it was the sound that made my skin crawl. The pipes were singing. Not metaphorically, they were actually producing tones, harmonics that seemed to resonate with each other, creating a constant low-frequency hum that I could feel in my bones. And underneath that hum, if you listened carefully, you could hear voices, dozens of them, maybe more. "Brooks, what do you see?" Dr. Heisman's voice crackled through my earpiece. I don't know how to describe it. The pipes don't make sense. They're not connected to anything functional. It's like someone built an entire system that serves no purpose except to exist. Can you get closer to one of the main lines? We're picking up some interesting readings from your location. I approached one of the larger pipes, the metal warm even through my hazmat suit. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. I could hear Mrs. Johnson, the woman from 3A, talking about her grocery shopping. A man I didn't recognize discussing his work schedule. A child reciting multiplication tables. All of them speaking in monotone. All of them repeating the same phrases over and over. "The residents," I said into my radio. "I can hear the residents in the pipes." "That's impossible," someone said over the channel, but Dr. Heisman cut them off. "Brooks, I need you to look for any kind of control mechanism, valves, switches, anything that might regulate the system." I searched through the maze of pipes, following the larger lines toward what I assumed was the center of the building. The temperature kept rising, and my suit's internal thermometer showed it was nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The voices grew louder, more insistent, and I began to hear my own name mixed in among them. "Officer Brooks? Danielle Brooks. Unit 12, 307. At the center of the space where the elevator shaft should have been, I found it. A massive pipe, easily 6 feet in diameter, running straight up through the building and down into the foundation. But this pipe was different. It was made of something that wasn't quite metal, wasn't quite organic, but seemed to shift between the two states as I watched, and it was covered in valves, hundreds of them, each one labeled with an apartment number. "I found something," I reported. God, I don't know what it is. Some kind of central pipe with valves for every apartment." "Don't touch anything," Dr. Heisman warned. "We're coming up." But as I stood there, studying this impossible piece of infrastructure, I noticed one valve that was different from the others. It was labeled 3B, and it was the only one that was open. A steady stream of that black, oily water was flowing from it, dissipating into vapor as soon as it hit the air. I reached out, ignoring Dr. Heisman's protests in my earpiece, and turned the valve closed. The effect was immediate. The singing in the pipes stopped. The voices cut off mid-word. The temperature began to drop rapidly. And then, from everywhere and nowhere at once, came a sound like screaming. Not human screaming. This was the sound of metal under stress, of pressure building beyond tolerance, of something that should not be suddenly being forced to stop. The pipes began to shake, vibrating with increasing violence. The black water started spraying from joints and seams, hissing as it hit the cooler air. And through my earpiece, I heard Dr. Heisman shouting for everyone to evacuate the building immediately. I ran, through the maze of pipes, toward the access hatch, the whole structure groaning and shrieking around me. I practically fell down the ladder, hands slipping on the rungs, and hit the 6th-floor hallway hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Strong hands pulled me to my feet, other officers, and we ran for the stairwell as the building began to shake like it was in an earthquake. We made it out just as the windows on the top floor exploded outward, showering the street with glass and that black water. The building groaned, twisted, and then, impossibly, the 6th floor collapsed into itself, leaving floors 1 through 5 intact, but creating a gap where the top of the building should have been, where the hidden infrastructure had been. It took 3 days for the city to condemn and demolish what was left of the Grandview apartments. During the demolition, they found something that made the national news, though the full details were never released to the public. In the foundation, below the basement, was another hidden space, a room that didn't appear on any blueprint, filled with machinery that no one could identify. Machinery that seemed to be made of the same not quite metal, not quite organic material as that central pipe. And in the center of that room, they found Harold Simmons. He was alive, but catatonic, his body somehow fused with the machinery, tubes running from the devices into his arms, his neck, his skull. He was removed and taken to a specialized medical facility that I wasn't given clearance to know about. The official report said he died 3 days later. But Malik, who somehow had a cousin who worked at the facility, told me different. He said Harold was still alive, still connected to machines, but now the machines were normal medical equipment. And sometimes, late at night, the nurses would hear him whispering numbers, always ending in 7, always at 3:07. After the Grandview incident, I thought my involvement with what the federal agents had started calling the infrastructure anomaly was over. The building was gone, the investigation had been classified beyond my clearance level, and I'd been told in no uncertain terms to forget what I'd seen and never discuss it with anyone outside the task force. For about 3 weeks, I almost managed to convince myself it had been some kind of shared hallucination, a gas leak maybe, or stress-induced psychosis. Then the calls started coming in from other precincts. The first was from downtown, Precinct 9, a welfare check at an old hotel that had been converted to apartments in the 1960s. Officer reported strange sounds from the pipes, residents acting synchronized, and receipts. Always receipts. By the time backup arrived, 3 residents were missing, and the officer who'd responded first was found standing in the basement staring at the boiler, completely non-responsive. The second came from the south side, an abandoned office building where squatters had reported seeing lights on the 7th floor, a floor that, according to city records, didn't exist. Investigation revealed a hidden space, just like at the Grandview, filled with that same impossible piping. By the third call, from a nursing home on the east side where residents had started walking the halls at exactly 3:07 a.m. every night, Dr. Heisman had returned with a full federal task force. She set up a command center in a downtown office building and started mapping incidents. Within a week, she'd identified 17 buildings in our city alone that showed similar anomalies. I was brought back onto the team, given a temporary federal clearance, and partnered with Agent David Kim, a specialist in what he called architectural psychology, the study of how buildings affect human behavior. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of intense dedication to his work that suggested he'd seen something that had changed his worldview, just like I had. "The pattern is always the same," he explained as we drove to investigate another report, this one from the apartment complex built in 1923. "Buildings of a certain age, always with 7 as a significant number in their construction or history, always with more infrastructure than the blueprints show, and always, there's someone like Harold Simmons, someone who notices the pattern and becomes obsessed with documenting it." The apartment complex, Paradise Gardens, sat in what had once been the nice part of town, but was now mostly abandoned storefronts and check-cashing places. 4 buildings arranged in a square around a courtyard that had probably been beautiful once but was now just dead grass and a broken fountain. The call had come from a resident named Marcus Washington, who claimed his upstairs neighbor had been dropping receipts through his ceiling vent for the past month. Marcus met us in the courtyard. He was in his 40s, wearing a janitor's uniform from the hospital where he worked nights. His eyes had the hollowed-out look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well, and his hands shook slightly as he led us to his apartment. "Started about 6 weeks ago," he said, unlocking his door. "Just 1 or 2 receipts at first, floating down from the vent. I figured maybe they got sucked up from somewhere else. You know how air circulation works in old buildings. But then it got worse." His apartment was clean but sparse, the home of someone who spent most of his time elsewhere. But the living room ceiling told a different story. The vent cover had been removed, and receipts hung from the opening like party streamers. Hundreds of them, some taped together in long chains that reached almost to the floor. I tried to talk to Miss Patterson upstairs, but she won't answer her door. Building manager says she's paid up through the year, so they won't do anything. But I know she's up there. I can hear her walking around at all hours, and the receipts keep coming. Kim was already taking photographs, documenting the scene with the kind of attention to detail that suggested this wasn't his first encounter with receipt-obsessed individuals. I examined some of the receipts more closely. They were all from different stores, different dates, but I noticed the pattern immediately. Every single one had a timestamp ending in 7. "Mr. Washington, has anyone else in the building reported anything unusual?" I asked. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, everything in this building is unusual. People walking the halls at weird hours, all going the same direction. Water that runs brown every night at, let me guess, you already know, 3:07. And the sounds in the walls. Like voices, but not quite. Like singing, but not quite. Like something that's trying to be human, but doesn't quite remember how." Kim and I exchanged glances. This was following the same pattern as the Grandview, but earlier in the timeline. Whatever was happening here hadn't reached its culmination yet. "We need to check the upstairs apartment," Kim said. "Mr. Washington, do you know if there's a building manager on site?" "Yeah, Mr. Johnson lives in—" Marcus stopped, his face going pale. Did you say Johnson? Is that significant? I asked, though I was already thinking about Mrs. Johnson from the Grandview, who'd vanished along with all the other residents. It's just, there are a lot of Johnsons in this building. Like, a lot. Different families, no relation to each other, but probably a third of the residents are named Johnson. I always thought it was weird, but figured maybe there was some kind of family connection I didn't know about. Kim was already pulling up resident records on his tablet. His expression grew increasingly concerned as he scrolled through the data. 17 out of 49 residents have the last name Johnson. Statistically, that's impossible, I finished. Unless it's not a coincidence. We got the master key from Mr. Johnson, the building manager, a different Johnson than any from the Grandview, I checked, and headed to the 4th floor where Miss Patterson lived. The hallway was dimmer than it should have been. Half the lights burned out or flickering. The carpet was that same disorienting pattern I'd seen in older buildings, geometric shapes that seemed to move if you didn't look directly at them. Apartment 4G was at the end of the hall. When we knocked, there was no response, but we could hear movement inside. A rhythmic sound, like someone pacing. Kim announced us as federal agents, warned that we were coming in, and unlocked the door. The smell hit us first, not death, but paper. The dry, dusty smell of thousands and thousands of pieces of paper. The apartment was completely full of receipts, but not scattered like in Harold's place. These were organized into structures, walls, tunnels, architectures made entirely from receipts taped and glued together. It was like walking into a paper maze, with passages just wide enough for a person to move through. "Miss Patterson," I called out. "This is Officer Brooks. We're here to help." The pacing sound continued, coming from deeper in the apartment. We followed the paper tunnels, our flashlights creating dancing shadows on the receipt walls. Some of the receipts were new, but others were decades old, yellowed and brittle. And on every single one, I could see the same pattern. Timestamps ending in 7. We found Miss Patterson in what had been the bedroom. She'd built a cocoon around herself. A spherical structure made entirely of receipts with just enough space inside for her to sit cross-legged. She was probably 70 years old, thin to the point of emaciation, still wearing what looked like a nightgown from weeks ago. Her eyes were closed, and she was whispering numbers in a steady rhythm. 307, 417, 527, 637. "Miss Patterson," Kim said gently, "we need to get you some help." Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment they were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye. Then she blinked, and they were normal again, pale blue and confused. "I'm documenting," she said, her voice hoarse. "Someone has to document, Harold told me. Before he went into the system, he told me someone had to continue the work." "You knew Harold Simmons?" I asked. "We all knew Harold." He understood. He saw the pattern first, the sevens, the buildings, the infrastructure that doesn't belong. He tried to map it all, tried to understand how they were connected. She gestured weakly at the receipt walls around her. Each receipt is a point of connection. A moment when energy transfers from us to them. Through the simple act of commerce, we feed the system. "Who are they?" Kim asked, though I could tell from his expression he'd heard this before. "The ones in the pipes. The ones who built the impossible infrastructure. They're not from here, not from now. They're from the between spaces, the gaps in architecture where physics breaks down. They use our buildings as anchor points, our commerce as food, our patterns as a way to manifest." She started coughing then, a dry, painful sound. When she pulled her hand away from her mouth, there was black liquid on her palm. The same oily substance I'd seen in the Grandview's pipes. "It's starting," she whispered. 307 is coming early today. I looked at my watch. 2:51 p.m. 16 minutes until 307. We need to evacuate the building, I said to Kim, but he was already on his radio, calling for backup and emergency services. Miss Patterson grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "The basement," she gasped. "Don't let them activate the basement. That's where the real infrastructure is. 7 sublevels that don't exist, can't exist, but do." We helped her to her feet, but she could barely walk. Kim carried her while I led the way through the paper maze, but as we reached the apartment door, we heard them. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, all walking in perfect synchronization. I peered out to see at least a dozen residents, all walking toward the stairwell with that same blank expression I'd seen at the Grandview. They were all heading down, toward the basement. "We need another way out," I said. "Fire escape," Kim suggested. But when we reached the window, we saw more residents in the courtyard, all walking toward the building's center, all moving with that same unified purpose. My watch read 3:05. 2 minutes, Ms. Patterson whispered. "At 3:07, the infrastructure activates. The pipes sing, the water turns black, and anyone who's been marked by the pattern gets pulled into the system." "Marked how?" I asked. She looked at me with those pale eyes. "You've seen the truth. You've been in the impossible spaces. You have the scent of the between on you now. We all do." 3:06? The building began to vibrate, a low frequency that I felt more than heard. In the walls, the pipes began their singing, that harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in my bones. Kim was trying to reach someone on his radio, but all he got was static mixed with what sounded like voices speaking in unison. 77777, 3:07. The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard the sound of rushing water, not from one source but from everywhere, in the walls, under the floors, above the ceiling. The receipt cocoon in the bedroom began to glow with a phosphorescent light, and Miss Patterson started convulsing in Kim's arms. "We need to move," I said, pulling out my flashlight. But as its beam cut through the darkness, I saw that the hallway had changed. Where there had been a straight corridor, there was now a maze of pipes, some massive, some tiny, all pulsing with that black water. The geometry was wrong. We were still on the 4th floor, but somehow we were also in the basement, and also in that impossible space above the building that shouldn't exist. Kim set Miss Patterson down gently. She'd stopped convulsing and was now standing on her own, but her eyes were solid black again, and when she spoke, it wasn't just her voice but dozens, all in harmony. "The system welcomes you," they said through her. "You've been chosen to document, to witness, to become part of the infrastructure." That's when I remembered what I'd done at the Grandview, closing valve 3B. It had disrupted everything, caused the system to collapse. "Maybe." "Kim," I said, "we need to find the control mechanism." "The valves." He nodded, understanding immediately. We ran through the maze of pipes, Miss Patterson following us with that synchronized walk. Other residents emerging from the walls themselves, all converging on our position. The flashlight beam caught glimpses of impossible architecture. Staircases that led up and down simultaneously. Doors that opened onto rooms that couldn't exist in 3-dimensional space, and always, always the pipes. We found it in what should have been the elevator shaft, but was now a vertical tunnel of interwoven pipes. The same configuration as the Grandview, hundreds of valves, each labeled with an apartment number. But this time, I could see the pattern. It wasn't random. The valves were arranged in a spiral, a 7-pointed star that repeated at different scales, fractally, infinitely complex. "Which one do we close?" Kim asked. All of them, I said. Or none of them. The pattern has to be broken completely. The residents were closing in, their footsteps echoing through the pipe maze. Miss Patterson was closest, reaching out with hands that leaked black water from her fingertips. "You cannot stop the harvest," the voices said through her. "Every city, every building of the right configuration, all connected through the infrastructure. We are vast, we are patient, we are inevitable." Kim and I looked at each other, then at the valves. There were too many to close manually, and we were running out of time. But then I noticed something. A larger valve at the center of the pattern, unmarked, painted the same color as the pipes, so it was almost invisible. "The main line," I said. We both grabbed it, putting all our strength into turning it. It resisted at first, then slowly began to move. The singing in the pipes became a shriek. The black water began spraying from every joint and seam, and the residents stopped their advance, their synchronized movement breaking apart into confusion. The valve turned 90 degrees and locked into place. Everything stopped. The lights came back on. We were standing in a normal basement surrounded by normal pipes and normal boilers. Miss Patterson was on the floor, unconscious but breathing. The other residents were scattered through the building, confused and disoriented, but unharmed. But on the wall, written in what looked like soot but might have been something else, was a message. "System interrupted, rerouting through secondary infrastructure. Harvest will resume at next scheduled interval." The Paradise Gardens complex was evacuated that day. The official story was a gas leak, potential explosion risk. The truth was classified, added to a growing file of infrastructure anomalies that Dr. Heisman's team was tracking across the country. Ms. Patterson was taken to the same facility as Harold Simmons. The last I heard, she was catatonic but stable, occasionally whispering numbers that the medical staff had stopped trying to interpret. The building itself was scheduled for demolition, but I heard it still standing, empty, waiting. The city can't seem to find a demolition crew willing to take the job. They all cite scheduling conflicts or equipment problems, but I think they sensed something wrong about the place. Marcus Washington moved in with his sister in another state. He sent me an email a month later, just 2 words. "No sevens." I knew what he meant. He was checking timestamps, avoiding the pattern, trying to stay off the grid of whatever was using our commerce, our routine transactions, as a way to track and harvest us. But here's the thing I couldn't tell him, couldn't tell anyone outside the task force. It was spreading. Every old building with the right configuration, the right history, the right hidden infrastructure was potentially a node in this network. And we had no idea how to stop it, only how to temporarily interrupt it. 6 months after Paradise Gardens, I'd investigated 23 buildings with Dr. Heisman's task force. Each one showed the same signs: impossible infrastructure, residents obsessed with documentation, usually receipts, timestamps clustered around sevens, and always that black water in the pipes that shouldn't exist. We'd gotten good at the interruptions. Find the main valve, turn it, evacuate the building before the harvest could occur. We'd saved hundreds of people from whatever fate awaited them in the system. But we weren't solving the problem, just postponing it. And with each building we investigated, the pattern became clearer and more terrifying. Kim had started mapping the buildings, not just geographically but architecturally. Every single one had been built or renovated in a year ending in 7. Everyone had some connection to the number: 7 floors, 7 units per floor, built on Lot 77, addressed on 7th Street. It was like someone, or something, had been planning this for over a century, placing these architectural anchors throughout our cities, waiting for the right time to activate them. Dr. Heisman had a different theory. She believed the buildings weren't built for this purpose, but were infected by it. Think of it as an architectural virus, she explained during one of our briefings. It seeks out structures with certain mathematical properties, certain geometries that allow for the impossible spaces to exist. The number 7 isn't magical, it's structural. Seven-fold symmetry creates gaps in three-dimensional space where four-dimensional objects can anchor. I pretended to understand what she meant, but the truth was, the more we learned, the less sense any of it made. We were dealing with something that operated outside our understanding of physics, architecture, and reality itself. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday night in April, nearly 7 months to the day after the Grandview incident. I was off duty, actually asleep for once, when my phone rang at, of course, 3:07 a.m. It was Malik Jordan. "Officer Brooks," he said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. "I need your help. They're here." I sat up immediately, already reaching for my clothes. "Who's there, Malik? Where are you?" "The Riverside Towers. I got a job here after Grandview, night security again. But, Officer Brooks, this building, it's wrong. It's all wrong. And tonight, the residents, they're all walking. All of them. Every single one. They're going to the 7th floor." My blood went cold. The Riverside Towers was a luxury high-rise downtown, only 5 years old. It shouldn't have been part of the pattern. It was too new, too modern. "Malik, get out of there. Don't try to stop them. Just get out." "I can't." His voice was barely a whisper now. "The doors are sealed. The elevators only go to 7. And Officer Brooks, the building has 7 floors. But from the outside, I counted when I first got the job. From the outside, it only has 6. I was already in my car, breaking every traffic law to get downtown. I called Kim, then Dr. Heisman, then dispatch for backup. But I knew I'd get there first. The Riverside Towers was only 10 minutes away, and every instinct I developed over months of these investigations was screaming that we were running out of time. The building stood against the night sky like a glass and steel monolith. Its windows dark except for the 7th floor, which glowed with that phosphorescent light I'd come to associate with the impossible spaces. But Malik was right. From the outside, I could only count 6 floors. The 7th existed and didn't exist simultaneously, a paradox that hurt to look at directly. The front doors were indeed sealed, not locked, but fused shut as if the glass had melted and re-solidified. Through them, I could see the lobby was empty except for Malik, standing by his security desk, phone to his ear. "I can see you," he said through the phone. "But you look wrong. Like you're far away and close at the same time. Malik, I'm going to find another way in. Stay where you are. I don't think I have a choice. My feet, they won't move. It's like they're part of the floor now." I ran around the building, looking for any entry point. The parking garage gate was down and wouldn't respond to any override codes. The emergency exits were sealed like the front door. But then, I remembered something from one of Kim's architectural analyses. Modern buildings still needed old-fashioned infrastructure. They still needed pipes. The utility access was hidden behind a landscaped area, a heavy metal door that required bolt cutters to get through the lock. Inside was a narrow tunnel filled with the building's guts, electrical conduits, water mains, sewage pipes, all the things that made modern life possible, but that we never think about. As I crawled through the tunnel, I could hear it, the singing in the pipes. But it was different this time. More complex, more harmonious. Like the building itself was an instrument, and something was playing it. I emerged in the basement mechanical room, and immediately I understood why this building had been targeted despite its age. The pipes weren't just modern infrastructure. Woven among them, hidden unless you knew what to look for, were older pipes. Ancient pipes. Pipes that predated the building, the neighborhood, maybe even the city itself. The building was built on an old site. Dr. Heisman's voice crackled through my earpiece. Kim must have patched her in. Records show there was a 7-story tenement there in 1917. It burned down, but the foundation and underground infrastructure remained. So they'd built new on top of old, unknowingly incorporating the infected architecture into the modern structure. Or maybe not unknowingly. Maybe someone knew exactly what they were doing. I made my way to the stairwell. Unlike the Grandview, this was modern and well lit, with those harsh LED strips that made everything look washed out. But as I climbed, the stairs began to change. The concrete became older, rougher. The walls showed water damage that hadn't been there moments before. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I was climbing stairs that belonged to a building that had burned down over a century ago. The residents were all in the hallways, standing in perfect formation, all facing the same direction, toward the center of the building. They weren't moving, just standing, waiting. I recognized some of them from newspaper photos. Tech executives, city council members, a federal judge. The Riverside Towers was where the city's elite lived, and now they were all part of whatever this was. I kept climbing, 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th floor, and then the impossible, a 7th floor that shouldn't exist. The stairwell door was different here, older, made of wood that had been painted and repainted so many times it was inches thick with layers of lead-based history. I pushed through and found myself in a space that defied explanation. It was simultaneously the burned ruins of the 1917 tenement and the pristine penthouse of the modern tower. Overlapping realities, each one partially transparent, bleeding through into the other. And in the center of this impossible space was a room that belonged to neither building. A circular chamber made of that not metal, not organic material, pulsing with life and purpose. Inside the chamber were 7 people, arranged in a 7-pointed star formation. 6 were residents I'd seen in the hallways, but the seventh was Harold Simmons. He looked different than the reports had described. Healthier somehow, despite being partially fused with the machinery. His eyes were open, aware, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Officer Brooks," he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You're just in time for the convergence." "Harold, what is this?" "What's happening? What was always meant to happen. The harvest isn't taking something from us. It's making us into something more. Every building is a cell, every resident a neuron, all of us connecting into something greater than individual consciousness." The 6 residents began to speak in unison, their voices harmonizing with the singing pipes. "We are becoming the city. The city is becoming us. Through commerce and routine, through pattern and synchronization, we merge with the infrastructure itself." "That's not transcendence," I said, moving closer to the control mechanisms I could see embedded in the walls. "That's parasitism. Something is using you, all of you." Harold's expression grew sad. "You still don't understand. There is no them. There never was. We built this. Humanity built this. Every time we chose efficiency over humanity, systems over souls, we fed the pattern. The infrastructure isn't alien. It's the logical conclusion of our own urban evolution. We created the conditions for our own transformation." I could hear sirens outside, backup finally arriving. But I knew they wouldn't be able to get in, not through the sealed doors, not past the architectural paradox that protected this space. "Then we can choose to stop it," I said, reaching for the central valve I could see in the wall. larger than any I'd encountered before, marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "You can try," Harold said, "but know this. Every building you've saved, every harvest you've interrupted, you've only delayed the inevitable. The pattern is embedded in our civilization itself. Every city has these buildings, every country. The infrastructure is global now, connected through pipes and wires and the invisible networks of commerce that bind our world together." I grabbed the valve and turned. It moved easier than expected, as if it wanted to be turned. The singing stopped immediately, replaced by a sound like reality tearing. The overlapping architectures began to separate, the 1917 tenement pulling away from the modern tower, the impossible space collapsing in on itself. Harold and the 6 residents screamed, not in pain, but in loss, like they were being torn away from something beautiful. The phosphorescent light flickered and died. The building shuddered, and I heard glass breaking somewhere below. Then everything went white. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The official report said there had been a gas explosion at the Riverside Towers. 7 residents were killed, of course it was 7, including Harold Simmons, who wasn't supposed to be there but whose body was found in the penthouse. The building was structurally sound but would be closed for renovations indefinitely. Malik survived, found unconscious but unharmed in the lobby. He didn't remember anything after calling me. The other residents were evacuated safely, with no memory of standing in the hallways or walking toward the 7th floor. But I remembered everything. And I knew Harold had been right about one thing. We hadn't stopped anything, just delayed it. The infrastructure was still there, in every old building, in every city, waiting. The pattern was still spreading, still growing, still pulling people into its synchronous dance. Dr. Heisman's task force was officially disbanded 2 weeks later. The official word was that the threat had been contained. The anomalies explained as a combination of old gas leaks and mass hysteria. But she pulled me aside before she left and handed me a flash drive. "Everything we've documented," she said. "Every building, every pattern, every incident. Someone needs to keep watching. Someone needs to remember. I still have that flash drive. I still add to it. Every time there's a report of residents acting strangely, of receipts appearing where they shouldn't, of pipes singing in the night, I investigate. I document. I interrupt when I can, because Harold was wrong about one thing. It may be inevitable, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Every person we save, every harvest we prevent, is a victory. Small, temporary, but real. I'm Officer Daniel Brooks. I work the night shift, and I'm still watching for the pattern, still listening for the singing in the pipes, still ready to turn that valve when the infrastructure tries to claim another building, another group of residents, another piece of our humanity. The timestamp on this report is 3:07 a.m. I didn't plan that, or maybe I did, unconsciously, the pattern working through me even as I fight against it. Maybe that's the real horror, not that something alien is trying to transform us, but that we're transforming ourselves, one transaction at a time, 1/7 at a time, into something that was always waiting in the spaces between our walls, in the pipes beneath our streets, in the infrastructure we built to support the life we thought we wanted. But as long as there are people like Malik who notice when things are wrong, people like Dr. Heisman who try to understand it, people like me who stand ready to turn that valve, the harvest can be delayed. The pattern can be disrupted. It's not much. But at 3:07 in the morning, when the pipes start singing and the receipts start falling, and the residents start walking in synchronization towards something that shouldn't exist, it's enough. It has to be enough. My name is Officer Marcus O'Connor. I've been patrolling these streets for about 15 years. During that time, working the night shifts, I've witnessed this city transform completely from top to bottom. Each call could be routine or completely transform the flow, like a photograph filled with shadows cast by streetlights and possibilities. Despite my 15 years of experience, I couldn't handle what happened that humid August night under the Riverside Bridge. It was 12:47 a.m. when the call came through dispatch. I was parked at the 24-hour gas station on Industrial Avenue, watching the sparse traffic and nursing my third coffee of the shift. The radio crackled to life with Janet's voice. She'd been working dispatch for 20 years and had that calm, measured tone that could make even the worst situations sound manageable. Unit 14. We have a report of someone calling for help under the Riverside Bridge, east side near the maintenance access. Caller was a passing motorist who couldn't stop but heard what sounded like someone in distress. The Riverside Bridge was a massive concrete structure that carried Interstate 85 over the industrial district. During the day, it was just another piece of urban infrastructure. Cars and trucks thundering overhead, while the space beneath served as unofficial parking for delivery trucks and the occasional homeless encampment. But at night, it transformed into something else. A pocket of darkness in an already dark part of the city where the overhead lights had been broken for months, and the city hadn't bothered to fix them. Unit 14, responding, I said into my radio, already pulling out of the gas station. ETA 3 minutes. The drive took me through empty streets lined with warehouses and shipping facilities, all closed for the night. The only lights came from security lamps behind chain-link fences and the occasional glow of a night watchman's booth. As I approached the bridge, I could see its bulk looming against the night sky, a concrete giant that seemed to swallow the light from my headlights. The maintenance access road was barely more than a dirt track that led under the bridge. I'd been down here before, checking on homeless camps, investigating reports of drug activity, the usual problems that plague forgotten corners of any city. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive, or maybe it was the way the shadows seemed deeper than they should be. But something made me check my weapon before I got out of the patrol car. I parked at the edge of the bridge's shadow and grabbed my flashlight. The massive concrete pillars that supported the interstate created a forest of geometric shapes, each one thick enough that 3 people holding hands couldn't wrap their arms around it. Between the pillars, darkness pooled like water, and the sound of traffic overhead created a constant rumble that masked other noises. Unit 14 on scene, I reported. Beginning search of the area. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the usual detritus of urban decay. Broken bottles, fast food wrappers, a shopping cart on its side. About 30 feet in, I found what I was looking for, or at least part of it. A barrel fire, the kind homeless people use, for warmth, but this one had been recently extinguished. The ashes were still warm, wisps of smoke rising in the humid air. Next to it was a backpack, military surplus by the look of it, left carelessly on its side with the contents partially spilled out. I approached carefully, scanning the area with my flashlight. No sign of anyone, but the setup was too fresh to have been abandoned for long. The backpack contained the usual items you'd expect from someone living rough. A change of clothes, some canned goods, a sleeping bag rolled tight. But there was also a notebook, spiral-bound and weathered, filled with handwriting that ranged from neat to increasingly frantic. I flipped through the pages, using my flashlight to read. Most of it seemed to be a diary or journal, entries dated over the past 3 weeks. The writer talked about meetings under the bridge, always at specific times. 2:15 a.m., 3:45 a.m., 5:30 a.m. Never on the hour, never at regular intervals, but always precisely timed. The latest entry, dated just hours ago, was different. They know I know. Tonight's meeting at 2:15 almost saw me. Had to hide in the maintenance tunnel. Heard them talking about the shipment, about the route changes, about what happens to people who see too much. Can't stay here anymore. If someone finds this, check the cameras. They don't know about all of them. I looked at my watch, 1:03 a.m. Just over an hour until the next meeting time mentioned in the journal. I should have called for backup right then, but something made me hesitate. The mention of cameras intrigued me. I swept my flashlight around the pillars and sure enough, spotted what looked like a small webcam attached to one of the concrete supports about 8 feet up, partially hidden by peeling paint and grime. As I moved to get a better look at the camera, I heard something that made me freeze. Voices coming from deeper under the bridge. But something was off about them. They seemed to echo wrong, bouncing off the concrete in ways that made it impossible to tell which direction they were coming from. I turned slowly, trying to pinpoint the source, and that's when I noticed the speakers. Small, battery-powered speakers had been placed strategically around the pillars, painted to match the concrete and nearly invisible unless you were looking for them. They were playing a recorded loop of conversation, just loud enough to be heard, but not clear enough to make out words. It was a decoy system, designed to confuse anyone trying to locate people by sound. Clever, I muttered to myself, then keyed my radio. Unit 14, I found an abandoned campsite and what appears to be surveillance equipment. Requesting backup for a thorough search. Static came back, then Janet's voice, but it was broken and unclear. Unit 14, breaking up, repeat. The bridge's massive structure was interfering with my radio signal. I'd have to move back toward my patrol car to get a clear transmission. But as I turned to head back, my flashlight beam caught something else. Fresh footprints in the dirt, multiple sets, leading away from the barrel fire toward the northernmost section of the bridge where the shadows were deepest. That's when I heard the scream. It wasn't from the speakers. This was real, raw, and close. A woman's voice, terrified and in pain. Without thinking, I ran toward the sound, my hand on my weapon, flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I navigated between the pillars. I found her about 100 yards from the campsite, and I recognized her immediately. Priya Nair, a graduate student at the university, who I'd seen at community meetings about improving safety in the industrial district. She was on the ground, holding her ankle, her bicycle lying twisted nearby. "Officer O'Connor," she gasped when she saw me. Thank God. I was riding home from the lab, my car broke down, and I heard someone crying for help. When I came to check, something, pushed me off my bike and ran. I helped her sit up against one of the pillars while I checked her ankle. Sprained, maybe fractured, but not life-threatening. "Did you see who pushed you?" Not clearly. They were wearing dark clothes, maybe a hood. But officer, there were others. At least 3 or 4 people, all running when they heard me coming. They left something behind. She pointed toward a cluster of pillars about 20 feet away. I told her to stay put and went to investigate. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 duffel bags, heavy and zipped shut. I didn't need to open them to know what was likely inside. Drugs, weapons, money, the kind of things that people hold meetings under bridges to exchange. But that wasn't what concerned me most. Next to the bags was a manila folder, and sticking out of it were photographs. Photographs of police officers. Photographs of me. The pictures showed me at various locations around the city, getting coffee, at my apartment, building. Even one of me at my daughter's school pickup. Someone had been watching me, documenting my routines. learning my patterns. And at the bottom of the stack was a note. O'Connor, 2:15 a.m., decision time. I looked at my watch, 1:27 a.m., less than an hour until whatever decision time meant. I grabbed the folder and headed back to Priya, my mind racing. This wasn't just a drug deal or criminal meeting. This was something targeted, something personal. We need to get you out of here, I told Priya, helping her to her feet. Can you walk if you lean on me? She nodded, but before we could take a step, the lights went out. Not the street lights. Those had been broken for months. The lights from the industrial facilities nearby, the security lights from the warehouses, even the dim glow from the interstate above, everything went dark simultaneously. The only light came from my flashlight, creating a small bubble of visibility in an ocean of black. Then the speakers came alive, not with recorded conversation but with a single voice, electronically distorted but clear. Officer O'Connor, you have 48 minutes to make a choice. The evidence you've found can destroy lives or save them. The cameras are watching. We are watching. Make the right decision. Priya gripped my arm tighter. What's happening? I didn't answer immediately because I was processing what I'd stumbled into. The notebook, the surveillance equipment, the photographs. Someone had orchestrated this entire scenario. They wanted me here at this specific time for this specific purpose. But why? Listen, I said to Priya quietly. I'm going to get you to my patrol car. Once you're safe, I'm calling for backup and we're going to no backup. The voice from the speakers interrupted. Any additional units that arrive will trigger consequences. The person who wrote that notebook you found, they're still here, still alive, for now. You have 45 minutes. My blood went cold. The journal writer, the one who documented the meetings, was being held hostage. This wasn't just about me making a decision. Someone's life hung in the balance. Priya, I said, making a quick decision, I need you to be my witness. Whatever happens in the next 45 minutes, I need someone else to see it, to document it. Can you do that? She nodded, her face pale but determined. I study forensic anthropology. I'm used to documenting crime scenes, just usually not active ones. We moved deeper under the bridge, following a trail that someone had clearly wanted me to find. Glow sticks had been placed at strategic intervals, creating a path through the darkness. Each one was numbered, 7, 6, 5, counting down to something. At glow stick number 4, we found another note taped to a pillar. Every night this bridge hosts transactions that destroy lives. Drugs, weapons, people. The notebook writer tried to document it, to stop it. Now they're going to die unless you make a trade, the evidence for the life. The moral calculus was clear but impossible. Save one life by allowing countless crimes to continue, or sacrifice an innocent person to potentially stop a criminal enterprise. It was the kind of decision that no amount of training prepares you for, the kind that exists in the space between law and justice, between duty and humanity. We reached glow stick number 1 at 1:58 a.m., 17 minutes until the deadline. There, in a clear area between 4 massive pillars, was a scene that looked like something out of a nightmare. A figure sat tied to a metal chair in the center of the space, hood over their head, completely motionless. Around them, a circle of battery-powered lanterns created an island of harsh white light in the darkness. "Stay back," I told Priya, then stepped into the circle of light. The figure in the chair didn't move, didn't respond when I called out. I approached carefully, weapon drawn but pointed down, every nerve on edge. When I was close enough, I reached out and pulled off the hood. It wasn't a person. It was a mannequin, dressed in clothes similar to what the journal writer had described wearing. but around its neck was a very real cell phone, duct-taped in place, showing a video feed. On the screen was a person, the real hostage presumably, in what looked like a shipping container. They were alive, moving slightly, but their face was obscured by shadows. The phone rang. No caller ID, I answered. O'Connor. Good, said the electronic voice. You found our demonstration. The person you see is real. Their location is real. Their danger is real. You have 13 minutes to decide. Place the evidence you've collected, the notebook, the folder, the photographs, in the barrel next to you and walk away. Or keep it, call for backup, try to be a hero. But know that if you choose the latter, by the time anyone finds that shipping container, it will be too late, judging by the lack of rust or weathering. Then I looked at the evidence I'd gathered. The notebook alone contained enough information to launch a major investigation. The photographs suggested a conspiracy that went beyond a simple crime into organized surveillance of law enforcement. This could be the break needed to clean up the industrial district, to stop the flow of drugs and violence that plagued this part of the city. But on the phone screen, a person sat waiting to live or die based on my decision. How do I know you'll actually release them? I asked. You don't, the voice admitted. But consider this. We've operated here for 3 years without police interference. The notebook writer threatened that. You, by being here, by seeing what you've seen, threaten that. We could have simply eliminated both problems. Instead, we're offering a trade, a return to the status quo. We continue our business, you continue your patrols, and everyone goes home alive tonight. This is Officer O'Connor. Priya suddenly spoke up, loud and clear. I'm recording this entire conversation. If anything happens to that hostage after Officer O'Connor complies with your demands, I have evidence of your promises, your admissions of criminal activity, everything. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then, Miss Nair, we weren't expecting you, but your presence actually helps our case. You're a witness that Officer O'Connor had a choice, that he could have saved a life. 10 minutes remaining. I looked at Priya, at the phone showing the hostage, at the evidence in my hands. 10 minutes to make a decision that would haunt me, regardless of what I chose. The weight of the badge on my chest felt heavier than it ever had before. 9 minutes, officer. The barrel waited, empty and patient for my decision. 9 minutes. In training, they teach you to make split-second decisions, to trust your instincts when lives are on the line. But they never prepare you for having 9 minutes. Just long enough to second-guess everything, not long enough to find a third option. I studied the phone screen, looking for any clue about the hostage's location. The shipping container's interior was generic, could have been any of thousands in the industrial district. The person inside was sitting on the floor, hands presumably bound behind them, breathing steadily but not moving much. Real or elaborate fake? Every instinct said real, but in 9 minutes, now 8, how could I be certain? Officer O'Connor, Priya said quietly. What can I do to help? I handed her my personal phone. Document everything, video, photos, audio, whatever happens here. I want a record that isn't controlled by them. She nodded and started recording, her injured ankle forgotten in the adrenaline of the moment. I appreciated her steady presence, a witness who understood the gravity of the situation without panic. 7 minutes. I opened the notebook again, scanning through the pages quickly with my flashlight. The writer, who signed entries only as JT, had documented not just meeting times but partial license plates, physical descriptions, code words overheard. One entry from a week ago caught my eye. They knew I was watching tonight. Left a message in the usual spot, stop, or become part of the transaction. I should leave, but if I don't document this, who will? The cops don't patrol here. Nobody cares what happens under the bridges at night. Except now, I know too much. They move product every 3 nights, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always during the shift change at the warehouse district when patrol coverage is thinnest. Smart. They'd figured out our patrol patterns, our weak points. The photographs of me suddenly made more sense. They'd been studying law enforcement the same way JT had been studying them. 6 minutes. Talk to me, I said to the phone. If I put this evidence in the barrel, how do I know the hostage gets released? You'll watch it happen, the voice replied. There's a tablet in the barrel. Once you place the evidence inside, you'll see the container opened and the person released at a public location. They'll be disoriented but unharmed. You have my word. The word of someone who kidnaps people isn't worth much. No, but the word of someone who could have killed you 6 different times in the past month might be. Check photograph number 17 in your folder. I flipped through the photos with trembling hands. Number 17 showed me at an ATM at night, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been less than 10 feet away. I hadn't noticed anyone that night. They'd been close enough to attack, and I'd never known. We're not killers, officer. We're business people. Violence is expensive, messy, draws attention. We prefer negotiation. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The weight of decision pressed down like the concrete bridge above. In 5 minutes, I could be complicit in releasing evidence of major criminal activity, or I could be responsible for someone's death. There was no good choice, only degrees of wrong. That's when I noticed something about the video feed on the phone. The timestamp in the corner was wrong. It showed 11:47 p.m. over 2 hours ago. This wasn't a live feed, it was a recording. This is fake, I said immediately. The timestamp is from a different time zone, the voice interrupted smoothly. The container isn't in your city, officer. Did you think we'd keep them somewhere you could potentially find? 4 minutes. My mind raced. Different time zone could mean anywhere. West Coast would be 9:47 p.m. too early. East Coast would be 2:47 a.m. No, that didn't work either. Unless... You're lying, I said. This whole thing is a setup. There's no hostage. Are you willing to bet someone's life on that? The voice had changed. Less electronic distortion, more human, more desperate. 3 minutes, officer. Decision time. I looked at the evidence in my hands, then at Priya, who was still recording everything. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw the same horrible calculation I was making. Risk an innocent life, or let criminals win? Officer, Priya said suddenly, look at the reflections. She pointed at the phone screen. In the corner of the video, barely visible, was a reflection in what might have been a metal surface. The reflection showed movement. Someone walking past the container. But the figure was upside down. The video is flipped, I realized. And if it's flipped? I grabbed Priya's phone and quickly pulled up a map of the industrial district. If the video was inverted, then the shadows in the container suggested the sun was setting, not rising. Western exposure. There were only 3 storage facilities on the west side of the industrial district that would catch evening sun at that angle. 2 minutes. I know where they are, I told Priya. Bradley's storage on Western Avenue. Units probably in the 200 block based on the sun angle. Impressive, the voice on the phone said. But irrelevant. You can't get there in 2 minutes. And if you call it in, if anyone else shows up, the consequences, I made my decision. Not the one they expected. I dropped the evidence into the barrel, But not before ripping out crucial pages from the notebook and pocketing them. Not before taking photos of key documents with Priya's phone. They wanted the originals. They could have them. But the information was already duplicated, already preserved. "Evidence delivered," I said. "Now release them." The tablet in the barrel activated, showing a new feed. This one was clearly live. I could see the timestamp matched current time. A figure in dark clothing approached a shipping container, unlocked it, and pulled out a person, alive, confused, but seemingly unharmed. The hostage stumbled out into what I recognized as the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on Route 9. "Transaction complete," the voice said. "You made the right choice, officer." The humanitarian choice. Did I? I grabbed the tablet, the phone, everything I could carry. Because here's what's going to happen now. You got your evidence back, but I've got recordings of this entire exchange. Admissions of criminal activity, kidnapping, extortion. You think you're safe because you destroyed the physical evidence. You just created new evidence. Silence on the line. Furthermore, I continued, backing away from the barrel with Priya, I've got your pattern now. Meetings every 3 nights during shift change. I know where you operate, when you operate. You wanted to return to the status quo? That's not happening. The lights suddenly came back on. Street lights, warehouse security lights, everything. The sudden brightness was blinding after so long in the dark. When my vision cleared, the barrel was gone. Disappeared in the 30 seconds we'd been blinded. But I still had the tablet, still had the phone, still had Priya's recordings. "We should go," Priya said urgently, "now." She was right. We made our way back to my patrol car as quickly as her injured ankle would allow. I could hear vehicles in the distance, multiple engines coming our way. I got Priya into the passenger seat and pulled out just as 3 black SUVs passed us heading under the bridge. "Unit 14, I called into my radio, finally clear of the bridge's interference. "I need backup and medical at the Rosebud Diner on Route 9. Found a disoriented person who appears to be a kidnapping victim. Also need a unit to secure potential crime scene under Riverside Bridge." The response was immediate. Units dispatched, EMTS en route. By the time we reached the diner 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars were already there. The hostage was sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, talking to detectives. They were real. They were alive. My choice, whatever its other consequences, had at least accomplished that. The hostage turned out to be James Thompson, JT from the notebook, a 34-year-old social worker who'd started documenting the bridge meetings after one of his clients overdosed on drugs bought there. He'd been grabbed 3 days ago when he'd gotten too close to one of their transactions. He corroborated everything, the meetings, the surveillance, the organization behind it all. But when units arrived at the bridge, they found nothing. No speakers, no cameras, no evidence of the elaborate setup I'd described. Even the warm barrel fire I'd found at the beginning was gone, the ashes scattered. It was as if the entire thing had been erased. The only proof I had was Priya's recordings and the photos I'd managed to take. The tablet and phone I'd grabbed had been remotely wiped, showing nothing but factory reset screens. The torn pages I'd pocketed from the notebook were enough to launch an investigation, but without the full document, without the photographs and detailed surveillance notes, it was like having pieces of a puzzle with no picture to guide assembly. Priya gave her statement, backing up everything I reported. Her injury, the recordings, Thompson's testimony, it all supported that something significant had happened under that bridge. But without physical evidence, without suspects, without even proof of the elaborate setup I described, what could be prosecuted? Internal Affairs got involved, of course. Any time an officer claims to have been surveilled, threatened, and extorted, there are procedures. I spent the next 3 weeks in interviews, polygraphs, psychological evaluations. They believed me. The evidence Priya had recorded was compelling, but belief and actionable intelligence are different things. The bridge meetings stopped, at least at that location. Whether the organization moved elsewhere or disbanded, we never determined. Thompson, recovered from his ordeal, tried to reconstruct his notebook from memory, but trauma had affected his recall. He remembered feelings more than facts, fear more than faces. A month after the incident, I received an unmarked envelope at my home. Inside was a single photograph, me at the bridge, placing evidence in the barrel. On the back, someone had written, "The right choice is rarely the easy choice." Status quo maintained. I wanted to believe I'd disrupted their operations, that forcing them to relocate and reveal themselves had been worth it. But late at night, when I patrol past other bridges, other forgotten corners of the city, I wonder if I simply pushed the problem into someone else's jurisdiction, onto someone else's conscience. 3 months passed after the Riverside Bridge incident. 3 months of normal patrols, routine calls, paperwork that made no mention of electronic voices or disappeared evidence. The investigation had stalled, officially remaining open but practically abandoned. Thompson had moved to another state, seeking distance from his trauma. Priya had returned to her studies, though we occasionally exchanged emails about the night that had bound us together as witnesses to something the system couldn't quite process. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday night in November, cold enough that my breath fogged in the patrol car despite the heater running full blast. Different bridge this time, the Conway Street overpass on the south side, a smaller structure that crossed the old railroad tracks that hadn't seen a train in decades. Unit 14, we've got a 1054 at Conway Overpass, possible signal 7 inches. 10-54 meant possible dead body. Signal 7 meant dead on arrival. My blood ran cold, but not from the temperature. Unit 14 responding. ETA 5 minutes. The Conway Overpass was in a residential area, one of those neighborhoods that had been nice 40 years ago but now struggled with abandoned houses and overgrown lots. The bridge itself was maybe 30 feet high, concrete and steel, utilitarian compared to Riverside's massive structure. But as I approached, I saw something familiar that made my stomach twist. Portable work lights had been set up underneath, creating pools of brightness in the shadows. 2 units were already on scene when I arrived. Officer Patricia Vance, a 5-year veteran I'd worked with before, met me at the perimeter they'd established. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, her face pale. "It's unusual." She led me under the bridge where the work lights illuminated a scene that was definitely unusual. A body lay in the center of a circle drawn in what looked like chalk. Male, mid-40s, wearing dark clothing. But that wasn't the unusual part. The unusual part was the notebook clutched in his hands and the dozens of photographs spread around him in a precise pattern. I recognized the notebook immediately. It was the same type Thompson had used, spiral-bound with a weathered cover. But this was a different one, filled with different handwriting. The photographs showed various locations around the city, all bridges, all underpasses, all the forgotten spaces where the city's architecture created shadows. "There's no blood," Vance said. "No obvious trauma. Me won't be here for another 20 minutes. But near as we can tell, he just died. Sitting here, holding that notebook." I knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb potential evidence. The man's face was peaceful, eyes closed, no signs of struggle. But his skin had an odd gray tint, and when I looked closer, I could see dark lines under the skin, following his veins like his blood had been replaced with something else. "Has anyone looked at the notebook?" I asked. "Waiting for forensics, but..." Vance glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Marcus,
Your name is in there. Several times. My heart rate spiked. What? She pointed to a page visible without touching the notebook. There, in neat handwriting, was an entry dated 3 days ago. O'Connor was right. They didn't disappear. They just spread out. Every bridge, every overpass, every piece of elevated infrastructure has become a potential site. But it's not random. There's a pattern. 7 bridges, 7 nights, 7 transactions. Then they move to a new city, a new set of bridges. I've tracked them from Houston to Memphis to here. Tomorrow night, Conway. Then River Street. Then MLK. The pattern never changes, just the location. We need to bag this as evidence, I started to say, but then I noticed something else. The photographs around the body weren't random. They were arranged chronologically, showing the progression of something. Each photo was time-stamped, and in each one there was a subtle but consistent element, a symbol spray-painted on concrete, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. 3 intersecting circles with a 7 in the center. Vance, I said urgently, we need to check the pillars. We spread out, flashlights scanning the concrete supports. It took less than a minute to find it, the same symbol from the photographs, freshly painted, still tacky to the touch. What does it mean? Vance asked. Before I could respond, my radio crackled, but instead of dispatch, I heard that electronic voice I'd hoped never to hear again. Officer O'Connor, you found our message. Vance's hand went to her weapon. What the hell? This is being broadcast on all frequencies, the voice continued. The man you found was Benjamin Cross, investigative journalist. He got too close, asked too many questions. His death was not our doing. He had a heart condition, aggravated by what he discovered. But his research, his documentation, that cannot be allowed to surface. This is evidence in an active crime scene, I said into my radio. Any attempt to interfere will be met with consequences. Check Mr. Cross's jacket pocket, left side, inner pocket. Against my better judgment, I carefully checked the pocket. Inside was a flash drive and a note addressed to me. Officer O'Connor, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. The drive contains everything. 3 years of investigation, 17 cities, hundreds of transactions. But more importantly, it contains the identity of who's behind it all. Someone you know, someone you trust. The bridges aren't random. They're a network, and the network has an architect. Don't let them take this. Don't let my work disappear like Thompson's notebook. B. Cross. P.S. Conway Street. Midnight, every 7th day. Today is day 7. I pocketed the drive before Vance could see it, my mind racing. Someone I knew? Someone I trusted? The implications were staggering. All units at Conway overpass, the electronic voice continued over the radio. You have 10 minutes to evacuate. What happens next is not meant for witnesses. Like hell, Vance said. Calling for backup now. The work lights cut out simultaneously, plunging us into darkness. Then, from multiple directions, we heard engines, motorcycles from the sound of them, at least a dozen, converging on our location. Move, I shouted, grabbing the notebook and as many photographs as I could carry. Vance and I ran for our vehicles as the sound of engines grew louder. We made it to our patrol cars just as the motorcycles arrived. Riders in black helmets, faces invisible behind tinted visors. They didn't attack, didn't pursue. They simply formed a perimeter around the bridge and waited. On my radio, the electronic voice spoke again. The body will be gone when you return. The evidence will be gone. Mr. Cross will become another missing person, another unsolved case. Unless Officer O'Connor would like to make another trade. No trades, I said firmly. Not this time. Then consequences. The line went dead. The motorcycles remained in position, engines idling. We called for backup, lots of it, but by the time additional units arrived 7 minutes later, the scene had been sanitized. The body was gone, the chalk circle erased.
Even the symbol on the pillar had been covered with quick-drying paint. The only evidence that anything had happened was what Vance and I had grabbed: the notebook, some photographs, and the flash drive hidden in my pocket. Back at the station, we logged the notebook and photos as evidence. But I kept the flash drive. I know I shouldn't have. No, it was a violation of procedure and probably law. But Cross's note had been specific. Someone I trusted was involved. Until I knew who, I couldn't risk the drive disappearing into evidence lockup. That night, after my shift, I went home and plugged the drive into an old laptop I kept offline. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about the bridge incidents. Cross had been thorough, methodical, brilliant. He'd tracked financial transactions, shell companies, property records, and permit applications. He'd identified the pattern: cities with specific infrastructure layouts, bridges and overpasses that created natural gathering points invisible to regular patrol routes. But more damning was his discovery of who was facilitating it all. The name hit me like a physical blow: Deputy Chief Raymond Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald had been my mentor when I joined the force. He'd recommended me for commendations, supported my transfer requests, even attended my daughter's birthday party 2 years ago. But according to Cross's research, Fitzgerald had been using his position to identify patrol gaps, redirect units at crucial times, and ensure certain reports never got proper investigation. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Every city where the bridge transactions occurred, Fitzgerald had attended law enforcement conferences within 6 months prior. Every time a unit got close to discovering something significant, Fitzgerald had been involved in reassigning personnel or redirecting resources. He was the architect Cross had mentioned, using his knowledge of law enforcement to create perfect blind spots. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the weight of knowledge I wished I didn't have. Reporting this would mean accusing a decorated officer with 30 years of service. Not reporting it would mean being complicit in whatever happened next. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "You've seen the drive," the electronic voice said. Not a question. "How did you—" Benjamin Cross was brilliant but predictable. We knew he'd reach out to you eventually. You're the only officer who'd gotten close and lived to tell about it. So, you killed him. We told you, his death was natural. A weak heart couldn't handle the stress of discovery. But his research, that's different. That needs to disappear. Not happening. Officer O'Connor, you have a decision to make. Again. But this time the stakes are different. This time, it's not about saving one life. It's about protecting your entire family. My blood went cold. If you threaten my family, we don't threaten, we inform. Check your email. Against my better judgment, I opened my email. There was a message with no subject, just attachments. Photos of my daughter at school, my ex-wife at work, my mother at the grocery store, all taken within the last 24 hours. "We know you copied the drive," the voice continued. "We know you haven't reported it yet. You're trying to decide who to trust, how to proceed. Let us make it simple. Destroy the drive, forget what you've learned, and everyone continues their normal lives. Or pursue this, and learn how many accidents can happen in a single day." You're bluffing. Too many accidents would trigger. Would trigger what? An investigation? Led by Deputy Chief Fitzgerald? Think, officer. Think about how deep this goes, how many bridges exist in how many cities, how much money flows through those shadows. You're not fighting criminals. You're fighting an economy. An ecosystem that has existed longer than you've been alive and will exist long after you're gone. The line went dead. I sat in my dark apartment, drive in one hand, phone in the other, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Report Fitzgerald and risk my family, or stay silent and let the network continue. But then, I remembered something Cross had written in his research. The network's strength is its invisibility. Expose one node, and the entire system becomes vulnerable. I made my decision. Not to report to my department where Fitzgerald could intercede, but to reach out to someone else Cross had mentioned in his files. BI Special Agent Diana Garcia, who'd been independently investigating similar patterns in other cities. The email I sent was simple. I have Benjamin Cross's research. Riverside Bridge was just the beginning. Her response came within minutes. Federal Building, tomorrow, 3 a.m. Come alone. Trust no one in your department. I looked at the flash drive, then at the photos of my family. In 5 minutes, under a bridge, I'd learned that sometimes the right choice isn't about choosing between good and evil. Sometimes it's about choosing which evil you can live with. Tomorrow at 3 a.m., I would find out if I'd chosen correctly. The Federal Building at 3 a.m. was a monument to emptiness, its lobby echoing with the footsteps of a single security guard who checked my ID with the thoroughness of someone who had nothing else to do. Special Agent Diana Garcia met me on the 7th floor. Of course, it was the 7th floor, in a conference room that overlooked the city's sleeping sprawl. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of intense focus that suggested she'd been chasing shadows for so long that she'd learned to see in the dark. On the table in front of her were files, dozens of them, each labeled with the city name and a date. Officer O'Connor, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Benjamin Cross sent me pieces of his research over the past year. Never the whole picture, just fragments. He was paranoid about communications being intercepted. I placed the flash drive on the table. He had good reason to be paranoid. She plugged the drive into a laptop that I noticed wasn't connected to any network, completely isolated. As she scrolled through Cross's files, her expression grew increasingly grim. "Deputy Chief Fitzgerald," she said finally. "We've had suspicions but no proof. This changes everything." "How deep does it go?" I asked. "Deeper than you want to know. 17 cities that we've confirmed, possibly more. Always the same pattern. Someone in law enforcement creating blind spots. Someone in city planning ensuring certain areas remain undeveloped. Someone in utilities keeping specific zones dark. It's not random crime, it's organized infrastructure." She pulled up a map on her laptop, red dots marking cities across the country. Every city connected by interstate highways, all with similar bridge configurations, all with law enforcement conferences that Fitzgerald attended. He was recruiting, I realized, finding officers in each city who could be turned, or threatened or blackmailed. Garcia pulled out a file marked Conway Street and showed me surveillance photos. We've been watching that bridge for 2 weeks, ever since Cross told us about the 7-day pattern. But tonight, when the body appeared, our surveillance equipment mysteriously failed. All of it, simultaneously. They knew you were watching. Someone knew. The question is who? She looked at me directly. "Officer O'Connor, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. We believe there's a second person in your department involved. Someone who's been feeding information to the network about our investigation." My mind raced through possibilities. Who had access? Who had opportunity? Then it hit me, the one person who'd been present for everything, who'd always seemed to know just a little too much. "Dispatch," I said. "Someone in dispatch?" Garcia nodded slowly. Janet Morrison. 20 years with your department, perfect record, above suspicion. But she's been on duty for every major incident, every missed patrol, every redirected unit. She's the spider in the center of the web, using her position to coordinate everything. Janet. I'd known her my entire career. She'd talked me through my first pursuit, had been the calm voice in chaotic situations, had sent flowers when my daughter was born. The betrayal felt physical, like a punch to the gut. We're moving on this tomorrow night, Garcia continued. Coordinated raids in all 17 cities. But we need your help for the local operation. Fitzgerald and Morrison don't know that you have Cross's research. You're still trusted. We need you to get them to the Conway Street Bridge tomorrow at midnight. You want me to be bait. I want you to be the inside man. Wear a wire, get them talking, get them to admit their involvement. Without that, even with Cross's research, we're looking at circumstantial evidence that good lawyers could tear apart. I thought about my family, about the photos they'd sent. They've threatened my family. If I do this, we've already moved them. As of 2 hours ago, your ex-wife and daughter are in protective custody, along with your mother. They're safe, but they'll stay that way only if we end this tomorrow. 2 hours ago. While I was driving here, making my decision, the FBI had already been protecting my family. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the realization of how deep I was in this. What do you need me to do? Garcia spent the next hour briefing me on the operation. 17 cities, hundreds of agents, all moving simultaneously at midnight. The Conway Street Bridge would be ground zero for our city, with federal agents positioned at every exit, every possible escape route. The key, she explained, is to get them to reveal the next level up. This isn't just about local corruption. Someone is coordinating this nationally, someone with resources and reach beyond what we've identified. Fitzgerald and Morrison are important, but they're still middle management. I left the federal building at 4:30 a.m. with a wire taped to my chest and a script in my head. In 19.5 hours, I would either help bring down a criminal network that spanned the country, or I would become another casualty of the shadows under the bridges. The rest of my shift passed in a surreal haze. Every call felt like it might be a trap, every routine traffic stop a potential ambush. But nothing happened. The city continued its normal rhythm, unaware of what was coming. At shift change, I saw Janet in dispatch, same as always, coffee in hand, headset on, directing units with the efficiency of 2 decades of experience. When she saw me, she smiled and waved. Just another day. Fitzgerald was in his office, door open, reviewing reports. He called me in as I passed. "O'Connor, heard you had some excitement at Conway Street last night." "Body disappeared before we could process the scene," I said, watching his face carefully. "Happens sometimes in that neighborhood. Gangs clean up their own messes." His expression revealed nothing. "Listen, I want you on special patrol tonight. Conway Street, midnight to 4. Had some reports of suspicious activity. There it was, the setup. He was placing me exactly where they wanted me." "Sure, Chief. Routine patrol? Just keep an eye on things. Report anything unusual." He smiled, the same mentoring smile he'd given me for years. "And Marcus? Be careful out there. These are dangerous times." I nodded and left, the wire feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds against my chest. 13 hours until midnight. I went home, tried to sleep, couldn't. Every sound made me jump. Every car that passed seemed suspicious. At 10 p.m., I put on my uniform for what might be the last time, checked my weapon, and drove to the station. The briefing room was nearly empty, just the skeleton crew that worked the overnight shift. Janet's voice came over the intercom, assigning units to their sectors. When she called my name for Conway Street, nobody thought it unusual. Just another assignment on another night. I drove to the bridge, arriving at 11:45 p.m. The area was deserted. No work lights this time, just the dim glow of a distant street lamp. I parked and got out, the wire transmitting every sound to the FBI team positioned around the perimeter. At 11:55, another car arrived. Fitzgerald, out of uniform, looking like any civilian out for a late-night drive. He approached my patrol car casually. "Marcus, thanks for coming." "Chief? What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are, I suspect, looking for answers." He glanced around, checking for surveillance. That body last night, the journalist. He'd been asking questions, getting close to something important. Close to what? To understanding how this city really works. How every city works. He leaned against my patrol car, relaxed, conversational. "You know, when I started 30 years ago, I was like you. Idealistic, thought I could make a difference. Then I learned that the real crime isn't what happens in the shadows. It's pretending the shadows don't exist." "I don't follow." "The bridges, Marcus. The transactions. The network. You think it's crime, but it's actually commerce. Supply meeting demand in spaces the regular economy can't reach. And someone needs to manage those spaces, keep them organized, keep them from spilling over into the visible city." My hand moved instinctively toward my weapon. "You're admitting to, I'm explaining reality. Every city has its shadows. We just make sure those shadows stay where they belong. Under bridges, in forgotten corners, away from good neighborhoods and voters who matter. It's not corruption, it's management." A van pulled up, no lights, engine quiet. Janet got out, still in her dispatch uniform. "Raymond, we have a problem," she said, then saw me. "Marcus, I should have known." "Janet," Fitzgerald said calmly. "Officer O'Connor was just learning about the necessity of shadows." "He's wearing a wire," she said flatly. "Has been since he walked out of the federal building this morning." My blood went cold. How did she know? She smiled sadly. 20 years of listening to voices, Marcus. I know when someone's speaking for an audience. Plus, we have friends in many places. Did you really think the federal building was secure?" Fitzgerald sighed. "Well, that complicates things." He pulled out a phone, typed something quickly, but not insurmountably. "Federal agents have this place surrounded," I said, hoping it was true. "No, they don't," Janet replied. "They're at River Street Bridge responding to reports of shots fired. Then they'll be at MLK Overpass for the explosion. Then Washington Avenue for the hazmat spill. By the time they realize all the emergencies are false, we'll be gone. You can't. We can. We have. We will." Fitzgerald looked genuinely sad. "Marcus, you were a good cop. You could have been part of this, could have understood that sometimes the best way to protect and serve is to contain and control. Instead, you chose to be a hero." The van's back doors opened, and 3 men in tactical gear stepped out. Weapons trained on me. Not standard criminals. These moved like professionals, like ex-military. "Here's what happens now," Fitzgerald continued. "You're going to have an unfortunate encounter with drug dealers. Tragic end to a promising career. The wire you're wearing will unfortunately be damaged in the struggle, its recordings corrupted. Another casualty of the war on drugs." I keyed my radio, hoping the FBI was listening despite the false alerts. "This is Unit 14 at Conway Street Bridge. Officers in distress. Fitzgerald and Morrison are..." The radio erupted in static. Janet held up a signal jammer. "Sorry, Marcus. No one's listening." But then, from the darkness under the bridge, came a voice I recognized. "Actually, everyone's listening." Priya Nair walked into the dim light, holding her phone up, clearly recording. Behind her came others. Thompson, who was supposed to be in another state. The homeless veterans who camped under various bridges. The social workers who tried to help them. Dozens of witnesses, all recording, all streaming live to social media, to news outlets, to anyone who would watch. "You forgot about us," Priya said. "The people who live in your shadows. Who see everything but are never seen." Benjamin Cross didn't just give his research to the FBI, he gave it to us. And we've been watching, recording, documenting everything. Fitzgerald reached for his weapon, but the tactical team hesitated, confused. They'd signed up to eliminate one cop, not dozens of civilians with cameras. That's when the real FBI arrived. Not from the false emergency scenes, but from inside the crowd of witnesses. Agents who'd been living as homeless, as social workers, as invisible people in the shadows for weeks, waiting for this moment. "Deputy Chief Fitzgerald, Janet Morrison, you're under arrest," Agent Garcia announced, emerging from the crowd with her badge displayed. The tactical team tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Every exit was blocked, not just by agents, but by the people who'd lived under these bridges, who'd been victims of the network's transactions, who'd lost friends and family to the drugs that flowed through these shadows. As Fitzgerald was cuffed, he looked at me with something like respect. "You didn't trust us with Cross's research. You gave it to them instead." "I gave it to everyone," I corrected. "The FBI, the media, the people. Because shadows only exist when people refuse to look at them." Janet said nothing as she was arrested, maintaining the dispatcher's calm even in custody. The tactical team surrendered without violence, professionals who knew when an operation had failed. But, as Agent Garcia had predicted, Fitzgerald and Morrison were middle management. Under interrogation, they revealed pieces of the larger structure. A network that reached into federal agencies, international shipping, even elements of organized crime that had gone legitimate. The bridges were just distribution points in a supply chain that stretched around the globe. The investigation would continue for years. 17 cities saw arrests that night, but for every person caught, 2 more remained hidden. The network adapted, evolved, found new shadows to inhabit. Bridge meetings became warehouse gatherings, then digital transactions, then something else entirely. But something had changed that night under Conway Street Bridge. The invisible people had become visible. The witnesses in the shadows had found their voices. And the thin blue line that I'd sworn to maintain had become something more complex. Not a barrier between order and chaos, but a bridge between the city we pretend exists and the one that actually does.